Chapter 1531. This time, even Duque could not stay idle. He held a tiche in his left hand and blocked in the void. If someone could look beyond the surface and see the space domain that mortals couldn't see with their naked eyes, they would be able to clearly see that a huge cover had forcibly smashed several sections of the space tunnel that had suddenly pierced through the endless void. As a native demigod, you have some skills. This time it was Kil'jaeden's turn to be smug. What about this? In the void, 12 new spatial passageways suddenly appeared. They forcefully crashed into the space of Azeroth in a domineering manner. Duque's expression finally changed. Ordinary spatial tunnels were first about stability and safety. After all, if the spatial tunnel was not good, the one who was teleported would be the one to suffer. On the other hand, if safety was not taken into account, then the construction of the spatial tunnel could be even more sloppy. No, it was already to the point of simple violence. The tunnel was open, but the lords had to jump in. Whoever did not jump, Grandpa Egg would kill them later. In any case, if they died, it would be considered a work injury. When others played with spatial teleportation, they at most used quality to suppress others. The Burning Legion's teleportation was King suppressing others with quantity. As long as their souls were not destroyed, demons could be resurrected in the distorted void no matter how they died. Moreover, no one knew just how many void overlords there were in the distorted void at the moment. 10,000 years ago, there were more than 1,000. 10,000 years later, because of Kil'jaeden's strict secrecy, even the Eridar twins could not say how many powerful lords there were in the Legion. Since ancient times, the defensive side had always been passive. When Duque was not careful, a teleportation gate arrived first. In less than a second, it broke through Duque's void defense line and opened the teleportation gate into the Sunwell. F***CK. Duque could not help but curse. King Galaxis. Another boss with a name. Anyone who could leave a name in the Legion was rarely a weakling. That guy should have been the second leader of a trial team called the Crusaders in Nascent's history. Unexpectedly, he had come out now. Succumb to the flames of the army. King Galaxis roared as soon as he appeared, shaking the mortals to the core. The raging green demonic flames began to spread in half of the hall. As an Eridar Warlock rank expert, Galaxis could definitely be classified as a high-rank Void Lord. In a way, he was like a weaker version of Archimonde. If Duque gathered all the experts to suppress him, it would be no different from chopping vegetables. But with Kil'jaeden, the great demon god here, it was undoubtedly a heavy burden. The Nephilim Emperor Vec, Lore immediately went up to meet him, and a blizzard came crashing down on him. He had thought that the duel between an Eridar Warlock and a magic-type demigod would be another elemental battle. The result made everyone's jaws drop. Vec Lore actually grabbed Galaxis by the waist like a wrestler, and then the two giants directly smashed through the wall of the hall and fell far away. They kept rolling until they reached the open space outside the hall, where the two giants really began to compete in magic. In fact, more than one person realized that the hall, which originally had a diameter of more than 200 meters, looked very big. As a battlefield for a group of huge giants, it was still not enough to look at. Originally, the dome had already been blown away by Duque, and now the twin emperors and their opponents had smashed through several walls and nearly 10 marble pillars. Finally, this glorious palace that had been built for thousands of years and could definitely be classified as a cultural relic collapsed. However, no one in the hall would feel pity for this. No one had the spare time to care about this. The next moment, the third high-rank Void Lord entered the field. Dreadlord Casranator. It was not that Casranator was strong. Under normal circumstances, he certainly could not compare to the original leader of the Dreadlords, Tichondrius. But when this guy appeared in the original history, Azeroth's anti-Titan formation was already full of holes, so he could appear in a more complete form. Now, it was a little similar to this situation. As soon as Casranator appeared, Vashj had no choice but to go up to him. At this time, the scene was already very chaotic. Nearby was Kil'jaeden's unceasing magic bombardment. All kinds of fire and shadow magic of great lethality were simply flying everywhere. And if a mortal was not careful, they would kneel. In the middle circle, small and medium-sized teleportation doors kept opening, and all kinds of elite demons surged out like a tide. At the periphery, there were now 3 demigods being held back by 3 high-rank Void Lords, and the outcome could not be determined for a while. Kil'jaeden used such a tactic that was completely different from Archimonde's to force the Alliance's side into a dead end. Archimonde was a fearless warrior. No matter when or where, he would always be alone in facing the enemy's army. Kil'jaeden was the other extreme. He used his army to make his enemies fall into a tight encirclement and despair, and in the end, it ended with a grievance. At this moment, Kil'jaeden looked more like a summoner. The 4th Void Lord appeared. This time, Duque could be considered to have learned his lesson. In the void, he stubbornly intercepted the thickest teleportation channel, and would rather let the small and medium-sized channels pass, leaving at least a quarter of his strength. Thus, only a nameless Void Lord came over. This time, it was the nature giant Thaddeus who suddenly jumped out of the weave. As Duque's elemental emissary, he had long since retrieved his human form. However, he knew very well that what truly allowed him to control lightning and unleash his ultimate combat strength was still that twisted and terrifying giant's body. So he appeared in front of everyone in the form of a giant. As soon as he came out, he fiercely wrestled with that Void Lord. At this moment, Kil'jaeden finally laughed out loud. Ha 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 ha. Stupid human. Foolish indigenous demigod. Do you really think that after you trapped my body, I didn't do anything and was just struggling here in vain? Ha ha ha. Along with the egg's laughter, the surrounding areas that were tightly sealed by the space barrier suddenly opened up. Instinctively, Duque sensed that what was operating there were actually high-grade teleportation spell formations that even the Eridar Gemini had not mentioned before. Eridar mages were chanting incantations beside the spell formations. Countless elite demons surrounded the spell formations, staring coldly at the ruins of the hall where the Alliance's heroes were. Outside the Sunwell, the Eridar Gemini, who had been waiting for news in stealth mode, suddenly stood up. 2 extremely similar faces showed the same fear. Not long after, the 5th, 8th, and 10th Demon Lord appeared. Chapter 1532. Battles were raging all over the Isle of Quel'Danas, but none of them could compare to the Sunwell Highlands. It was as if the place was suffering from the most violent earthquake, and the huge and glorious buildings were shaking non-stop. Bang! As if struck by a violent gust of air, the towering tower suddenly shook and then collapsed. The earth was shaking non-stop, and the palaces that were built by countless generations of high elven craftsmen over thousands of years, and were works of art kept creaking as if they were under unimaginable pressure. Every wall with gorgeous paintings, the marble floors that had been polished by hands for countless years to become extremely smooth, and the doors and windows that were carved with complicated patterns were all trembling, as if they were going to fall apart at any time. A distant howl that seemed to have come from ancient times could be heard. Then, above the ruins of the highlands, 2 huge and elegant blue creatures spread their wings and flew past at high speed. The icy breath blew past, and the rubble and dust that had been scattered due to the collapse of the towers all turned into larger pieces of ice. It was as if a blizzard had been summoned by a mage. A humanoid creature with a pair of fiery red wings shot into the sky like a sharp arrow, heading straight for the blue dragon. The ones fighting in the sky were naturally the Demon Lord duo of Calegos and Matagorsa. They were engaged in an intense battle in the limited airspace within the sealed space barrier. On the ground, Duque's elemental emissaries and the powerhouses of the Alliance were fighting against the Demon Lords. Almost the entire Sunwell Highlands was in a state of intense fighting. The Dread Guard Lord Scarless Aemir was a 3-story tall behemoth. He used his black and gold-rimmed pauldrons to hit the palaces hard, causing a storm of rubble. Valera jumped to his waist with incredible agility and gave him a hard blow. But she couldn't deal a fatal blow. Very quickly, William executed a beautiful intercept. Under the effect of fury, his entire body turned into a stream of light, and he struck the same wound with the 2 divine swords that he had fused together. Aemir's random attacks still caused all the nearby buildings to collapse. Hal could no longer remember how many abyssal lords he had killed. In any case, the rows of houses were as fragile as castles made of sand on the beach in front of this type of charging leader. Regardless of whether they were old or new, all the buildings were uprooted by the violent impact. Even the walls and roofs that had been reinforced with magic crumbled under the violent impact of the dark energy. It turned into countless fragments, like pieces of paper flying in the wind. The experts of the Alliance worked hard. The two blue dragons who came to work were also very hardworking. Duke's direct subordinates were even more so. Just how many Lord-class demons had he killed? After counting to about 20, no one cared about this matter anymore. Because there were more and more demon overlords, the experts on the Alliance's side were almost too busy. It was like the pressure was constantly accumulating in a snowball manner. It all depended on when it would truly become the straw that broke the camel's back. In the ruins of the hall, Duke was still fighting with Kil'jaeden. Light and shadow intertwined, and explosions rumbled. The highest level of magic collided in midair. The ruins of the hall, and even the entire night sky directly above, kept flashing with the light of the lines of law. Seeing that his side had gained an overwhelming advantage, Kil'jaeden began to toughen up. Ha ha ha. Duke Marcus, for a mortal to ascend to godhood, you're already very good. Your fate has been marked by the Grim Reaper. Maybe you can successfully shake it off this time and buy some time. But you'll soon be caught up again. In the ancient war, a few years ago, you had shaken off the death curse of fate twice. But I won't give you the chance to see it a third time. Give up. Your last struggle is meaningless. True victory and eternal life belong only to the Burning Legion. At this point, Kil'jaeden suddenly raised his hand, and dozens of shadow lines suddenly appeared in the void. They directly bypassed Duke's elemental defense, and Soul Whip was used on the experts of the Alliance. Even someone as strong as Magni Bronzebeard could not help but let out a painful groan. Not to mention the others. Unexpectedly, the egg's tone changed, and his arrogant voice became extremely tempting. But Duke Marcus, it's not just me. Even Archimonde and Sargeras admire you very much. As long as you're willing to join the Legion, you can become the third commander alongside me and Archimonde. After taking what the Legion wants, we can even give up on destroying Azeroth, and allow you to keep this planet as your exclusive property. Hiss. Every expert of the Alliance couldn't help but gasp when they heard this. The commander of the Burning Legion. That was the invincible commander who had swept through the entire universe in the past 25,000 years. No intelligent race, planet, or even galaxy could fight against the Devil Legion that had units of hundreds of millions. Hundreds of thousands of galaxies had been burned to ashes. Billions of lives had been plunged into misery and suffering. Even after killing Sargeras and Archimonde, no one dared to guarantee that these two powerhouses were really dead. Or perhaps there was a part of their souls left somewhere in the twisted nether, and they could rely on those souls to resurrect or something. Now Kil'jaeden was actually willing to offer such a high price tag for Duke. This could be considered a heavy investment. For a moment, Iroh the Hoof was taken aback. If Duke, the core of the Alliance, decided to join the Burning Legion, it would be too terrifying. The planet's protection circle that Azeroth was so proud of would immediately be destroyed from the inside, and the Legion would descend. Then, whether the Draenei could continue to escape was unknown. But before Iroh could finish thinking, he suddenly heard Duke's crisp voice. I refuse. Why refuse? Protecting this small planet was meaningless to those who pursued power. The army could bestow them with greater and stronger power. If you want, you can easily make thousands of planets bow to your feet. Kil'jaeden was still unwilling to give up. His voice shook the hearts of every Alliance member. Master of all worlds. This kind of power, this kind of temptation was simply irresistible to men. Could Duke refuse? Everyone was thinking, if it was them, would they refuse? Would they? But it would be difficult to make the decision to refuse, right? Beside Duke, countless magic circles suddenly opened, and countless elemental energy formed on their own, shooting towards Kil'jaeden like lightning. Duke, who was in the middle of the energy wave, looked calm. Chapter 1533. His gaze seemed to have transcended time and space, and he saw the past. It was the grand occasion when countless races united to resist the Burning Legion in the ancient war. It was the oath that the dragon race had sworn to protect the world for 25,000 years. It was the continuation of the civilization of thousands of intelligent races on this planet. It was, Duque spoke softly. As long as I have enough power, that's enough. I don't need the strongest power in the universe. Perhaps this planet is a power desert in the eyes of the army, but I'm already used to this world. I coexist with this magical land that is filled with danger, and protect the living beings that live here. I see the advancement of technology and civilization on this land as my own glory. I don't care how many living beings bow down to my feet, and I don't care about any ideal world. I only love my lover, my friends, my comrades in arms, and the people who raised them and live in this world. I wasn't born for this, but I'm willing to die for it. This is the commandment that I, the demigod of Azeroth, have set for myself. All of a sudden, every expert from the Alliance felt touched. The situation of the battle had already become difficult. However, even the most legendary mortal ascended god in Azeroth loved this world so much and never gave up. What was there for him to talk about tiredness? What was there to think about giving up? Thump, thump. Their heartbeats were so intense that they could hear them clearly even in the midst of a fierce battle. Duque, I love you. Sylvanas was the first to shout. The bold Queen Sylvanas shouted her declaration in the hottest way possible. In the name of Elun, as long as you don't leave, I won't abandon you. Tyrande gave up on being reserved and shouted. Then Gianna, Elucia, and Korea made their vows. After the queens made their declarations, the atmosphere suddenly changed. First of all, it was Magni who shouted, for the Alliance. Then William shouted, for Azeroth. In an instant, everyone was excited. Duque's slightly pursed lips relaxed. Thank you, Kil'jaeden. You have united our chaotic wills. However, do you really think you can defeat us with summoning spells? Duque's words shocked Kil'jaeden. Duque raised his hands to the sky, palms facing up. His palms glowed with a mysterious light. In just half a second, as if right above the edge of the sky, a beam of dazzling light shot out from the dragon fortress in the middle of the void battlefield, pointing directly at the Isle of Quel'Danas below. Kil'jaeden was shocked when a huge 5-colored rune appeared 2 kilometers above the island, Titan Titan. With this mysterious rune from the Pantheon Temple as the center, halos appeared one after another. Red, yellow, blue, green, black. From the outside to the inside, there were 5 colors. Every time the 5 colors cycled, it would repeat over and over again. It was unknown how many hundreds and thousands of cycles it had cycled. Every time a ring expanded outwards, countless magic runes would automatically form within the ring, forming a complete magic circle. These slowly connected magic circles were so complicated that they were completely beyond the limits of what a person's dynamic vision could observe. However, when these connected rings of magic circles spread out one after another, and covered the entire sky above the Isle of Quel'Danas, from the sky to the horizon and the sea, the demons that were enveloped by this formation were already in a state of chaos. This was because this magic circle was used by the titans of the Pantheon to deal with the demons from the distorted void when they transformed the universe. That was simply a natural counterforce, causing the demons under this giant compound magic circle to perish one after another. The weaker ordinary demons directly melted under the light of the magic circle. Even the power of a Lord-level demon was directly halved in this magic circle. Are you big lizards crazy? This is equivalent to removing the power of the protective magic circle to deal with me. Kil'jaeden screamed. At the highest point in the sky, Alexstrasza's hearty laughter came. Ha ha. You didn't expect it, did you? Anyway, Sargeras is still sinking in the bottomless abyss, and Archimonde has just died. You're the only one in the Burning Legion who can truly threaten this planet. As long as we take care of you, even if 10,000 lords come in, we can slowly deal with them one by one. This was a typical case of catching the big and letting go of the small. When Kil'jaeden descended, outer space had also sent tens of millions of demons to harass him. The 5-colored guardian dragon's actions were equivalent to drawing away most of the energy of the protective magic circle. The direct consequence was that even if the dragons tried their best to intercept them, there might still be hundreds of thousands of demons breaking through the magic circle and successfully descending. Of course, in the eyes of the dragons, As long as they could cripple Kil'jaeden, it was worth it. Obviously, such a big thing as changing the planet's protective magic circle was definitely not something that could be done in a short period of time. The dragons know it must be Duque. He had been planning this for an unknown period of time. Duque Marcus, Kil'jaeden roared angrily again. The second darkness of 1,000 souls also began to take shape in his hand. Duque, on the other hand, did not even have the desire to look at Kil'jaeden. He closed his eyes and breathed softly, incomparably slow. One breath. One breath. After achieving the body of an elemental demigod, breathing and heartbeat were no longer necessary. Duque still kept this habit because it made him feel more like a human, and not some kind of existence that had nothing to do with humans. What entered his lungs was cold air. In a trance, it was the biting cold aura from Northrend. Before it was cooled down by the northern continent, it came from Kalimdor on the other side of the sea. Before that, it came from the southern continent of Pandaria, which had yet to open a sea route. And before that, it came from the eastern continent where he was now. This was the cycle of the monsoon, across a long journey, across the ever-changing endless sea. Duque saw all this with his own eyes through the magic net. Relying on the magic net that connected more than half of Azeroth, he was like a true god. His gaze piercing through the mountains and the sea, the sky and the earth. Everything in Azeroth. It was all in Duque's eyes. One breath, one breath. Slowly, it responded to the pulsation of the planet. On the entire Isle of Quel'Danas, everything suddenly stopped. A feeling of stagnation, not distinguishing between friend and foe, imprisoned the will of all living beings to attack. The wind stopped. Half of the sky was drifting with snowflakes. The remaining half of the sky was sprinkled with the scorching light of the sun. The soldiers of the Alliance looked around in shock. They could not understand this situation. The sea was still crashing against the rocks on the shore, but every wave seemed to have lost its sound. Chapter 1534. The surging waves were mixed with ice particles, colliding with the boiling seawater at the magical dividing line on the surface of the water, forming a series of small whirlpools, and then constantly canceling each other out. On the island, the rising flames were still as terrifying as before. However, every cluster of flames and every field of fire was silent. Even the crackling sounds had disappeared. The situation on the entire Isle of Quel'Danas could be said to be extremely strange. Buzz buzz buzz. 6 colors of brilliance appeared on Duque's Atish. Fire, frost, arcane, thunder, light, shadow. But above these, there was a 7th color. No one present could describe what kind of color this was. Everyone only knew that this was a more blurred color than the above 6 elements. Duque slowly raised Atish, and when he opened his eyes again, his eyes were already full of colorful light. And in the middle of the black pupil, the gaze was as firm as the land that would not change for 10,000 years. Kil'jaeden. Before I am a person, an existence with an independent soul, I am first and foremost a guardian. The full name of this staff is Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian. Guardian. This name made Kil'jaeden gnash his teeth in hatred, but he had no time to hate anymore. Even he had to raise his head in shock. A strange scene was unfolding in the sky. With the addition of Duque's power, 1/3 of the power was now the dragon race, 1/3 was Elun's, and the remaining part was Duque's. As a result, the scorching sun, the night sky, and the colorful glow each occupied 1/3. It seemed that the 3 powers were different, but in fact, they all had the same source of power, which was the power law left behind by the titans of the Pantheon. In the ever-changing void, countless streams of energy were mixed together like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. They slowly flowed clockwise, emitting all kinds of blurred brilliance in the process of stirring. Snowflakes were falling, and the brilliance of the sun did not diminish. Unknowingly, the wind of all things blew again, and the flow of energy thousands of meters high in the sky did not stop for a moment. Jaina was deeply shocked. Such elemental control, such a mixture of powers, for a mage who had spent half his life immersed in magic books. It was definitely a subversive experience. Duque raised his head slightly. His deep black pupils reflected a line of energy that split heaven and earth vertically into 2 halves. The energy line was very thin, like the front sight of an infrared sight. The end of the energy line was Kill Jaden's glabella, which was stuck at the portal of the Sunwell. Kill Jaden couldn't wait any longer, so he released Thousand Soul Darkness. The roaring souls let out mournful wails as they charged at Duque. It was too late. Duque smiled as he watched the pitch-black pillar of light hit him. In the next moment, Duque was still completely fine. He still had a smile on his face, and even the aftermath of darkness of 1,000 souls did not spread to the surroundings. Only those who knew the ropes knew that although Duque looked like he was still there, he was actually already in a completely different dimension from the world of Azeroth. Although it was just a space crevice, as long as Kill Jaden had not deciphered the coordinates of this space crevice, Duque was absolutely safe. At this moment, the light in the sky shone brightly. The colorful glazed color turned into an even more dazzling and gorgeous brilliance. The color did not change, but it felt sublimated to the point of the light of wisdom. The not pure brilliance seemed to also indicate that when the Titans created the world, they spread the fire of wisdom to the world, and then gave birth to infinite possibilities. And this infinite possibilities gave birth to thousands of different existences, different individuals, and they contributed their powers and merged into one. All the Alliance soldiers who were not in combat had already knelt down in front of this brilliance. Duque held a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. His thunderous voice reverberated above the entire Isle of Quel'Danas. The burning legion that tramples on the living beings of all worlds. Experience the anger of billions of living beings. The entire planet of Azeroth trembled because of Duque's words. In less than 1/100th of a second, the trembling turned into a roar of all things. From the man-made palaces, walls, and floors, to the sand and grass on the ground. Even the trees, rocks, and the sea made a low and ancient sound. Reverberate, mix, reverberate. These existences could even be traced back to the beginning of the birth of the planet. However, they all woke up and responded to the declaration of Duque, the guardian of the planet, with a repetitive resonance. That was the supreme anger in the face of the atrocities that wantonly destroyed the world. Above the heads of all the people who were witnessing the battle on the Isle of Quel'Danas, the chaotic sky formed by countless energies suddenly split apart. A dazzling golden glow, like the rising sun, slowly descended, illuminating the sky above the entire Sindorii kingdom. Even Lordaeron, which was further south, and Northrend, which was further northwest, could see this dazzling brilliance blooming in the night sky. What was reflected in everyone's eyes was a golden pillar of light. Like a spear piercing through a target, it fiercely descended from the sky and pierced through the entire night. That was the brilliance from the Pantheon. That was the light of wisdom that the Titans had bestowed upon all things. At that moment, there was no second color between heaven and earth. No. Kill Jaden struggled with all his might. Sadly, he was still completely unable to move. After injecting most of the energy of the magic net into the sky and handing it over to Elune and the 5 dragon aspects to control, Duque injected all the remaining magic power into Atish. In the shattered void that mortals could not see, there were hundreds and thousands of spatial magic spells smashing over almost every second. Any improper response could cause Kill Jaden to break free from the imprisonment of the portal and escape. In a sense, the pressure on Duque was the heaviest. He was not only facing Kill Jaden, but also the Eridar Warlock Legion, who were desperately trying to save their master from the other side of the portal in the distorted void. Khadgar had long been at his limits. He could only rely on Duque and his system elves. Duque had the aura of 1 against 10,000. He held onto the egg tightly, not allowing him to move at all. No. Kill Jaden began to use all sorts of tricks. He flicked his 10 fingers, and a dozen soul whips extended from each fingertip, forming a large net that swept in all directions. He no longer had any hope of defeating Duque in a short period of time. He aimed at Duque's lover. He would rather endure the fierce attacks of Duque's demigods, and after a few grabs, he finally caught one. Chapter 1535. Actually, with the egg's status as a paste, capturing captives on the battlefield to threaten the enemy was extremely lowly. The egg had been around for tens of thousands of years, but it had never thought of doing such a thing. But he was really anxious. Even though he had only used half of his power and body this time, and was indeed injured after being completely destroyed, it was not irreparable. With Archimonde as a precedent, Kil'jaeden would leave behind enough soul to recover to its peak state and store it in the deepest part of the twisting void. Having made preparations beforehand did not mean that he was willing to admit defeat. This was a huge loss. If the other two army leaders were still around, this loss was a loss. The point was that he was the only one left of the three army leaders. Once he ran off to rebuild his soul and body, the army would inevitably fall into a power vacuum. In order to prevent the power from being divided, he and Archimonde had joined forces to kill many challengers or seedlings with the potential to become leaders. But now, because of his very likely failure, it would cause a terrifying chain reaction. At this moment, Kil'jaeden was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He used to be disdainful, but now he was desperate. He had heard that Duque was lustful and had many women, so he would try to capture one to threaten him. Even if it was not a complete success, making Duque hesitate might turn things around. Duke Marcus, your woman is in my hands. The egg waved the struggling female figure in its hand. Who knew silence? Silence. Deathly silence. After a short silence, the shameless Magni was the first to burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. The onlookers, William and the other two, laughed as well. In the end, even the serious Theon couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, even the egg, a genius with an IQ of 50, realized that something was wrong. Because he suddenly realized that the figure struggling in his giant red claw had the same face and clothes as the dreamy-eyed girl hiding behind Duque. Duque raised his first finger. First, Imriel is not my woman. At this point, Duque's hoof was already blushing. Second, the one you caught is a fake. As soon as Duque's voice fell, the golden figure in the egg's hand transformed into a streak of light and disappeared into the air. Duque smiled and pointed to the sky. Looking at the increasingly surging and massive planetary energy beams in the sky, Kil'jaeden finally fell into despair. Alessia. Saloras. You two bitches. Kil'jaeden's final roar could be heard from outside the Sunwell Highlands, scaring the Eridar twins out of their invisible state. In the end, this was also their fault. In the report to Kil'jaeden, Duque was described as a cross-race dating expert. Duque's new hobbies had become female dragons, Naga, and Dreenii. A truly awesome lie was 90% true and 10% false. The most fatal part was to trick people at the crucial point. According to this theory, the two demigods, Onyxia and Vashj, were either not present, or would they be easy to capture? Of course, Duque was also guarding against Kil'jaeden's desperate actions. In fact, when the egg summoned a bunch of demon lords, Duque had already evacuated the Alliance's powerhouses. King against king, general against general, this was the tacit rule of war. No one could leave the other party's boss and run off to bully noobs. Duque also took the opportunity to protect his own woman in disguise, and the only one left was Imriel. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Duque pulled his hoof into the spatial rift where he was, and conveniently left an illusory reality outside. Bang! With the combined efforts of Elune and the Pentashade Guardian Dragon, the energy of a small half of planet Azeroth turned into a slender golden line, and accurately poured onto Kil'jaeden's head. Surprisingly, there was no earth-shattering explosion, nor was there a terrifying power that destroyed everything around it. There was only an extremely strange and quiet melting. Kil'jaeden's body, which was as large as a small mountain, fell on his back. His chest was facing the sky, and his hands were flat. Because of the existence of his wings, his head drooped backward powerlessly. Such a huge commotion turned out to be all bark and no bite. What did this mean? That's it. In the distance of the Sunwell Highlands, many Alliance soldiers heard Kil'jaeden's long howl before he died. A captain slapped the recruit on the back of his head and scolded. Idiot! If there's really a big explosion, once the Sunwell is blown up, we and the elves will all die. He was right. It was precisely because the consequences were very likely to be very serious, and it would affect the entire Rotterdam continent at any moment that Elune and the Pentashade Guardian Dragon had to personally take action. It was precisely because there was a powerful goddess guiding this exaggerated power that mortals could not imagine that they could achieve such an ultra-precise blow that was as sharp as a scalpel. It could be said that this control was the biggest difference between a demigod and a true god. Duque himself was good at dealing with changeable situations, but Duque was completely helpless against such precise control. It was something that could only be achieved after countless years of experience. It was almost metaphysical. A little more might cause an explosion. A little less might not kill the egg. Duque really couldn't compare to a Lun when it came to such work that required a lot of experience points. However, it didn't matter. Kil'jaeden was dead. Although it was only a blow to the forehead. Even from a mortal's point of view, a blow to the forehead that went straight to the end of the skull was a fatal wound that was absolutely incurable. Kil'jaeden's massive body began to melt from the forehead like a candle that had been burnt out, turning into a puddle of demonic aggregates or something else. Anyway, under the purification of a Lun's lunar goddess light, he would eventually disappear from this world. The only thing left behind was the epic-level equipment that was wrapped in golden light. Of course, there was one exception. Wait! Queen Sylvanas was completely attracted by the orange light amidst the purple-blue light of the epic-level equipment. The gauntlet that resembled a pair of wings, the flamboyant body of the bow, and the azure background. The orange-grade artifact, Solidar Wrath of the Stars, that only Kil'jaeden would drop in history was presented in front of Queen Syriana without revealing anything. Sylvanas seemed to have sunk into some kind of confusion, as if she was caressing Duque, intimately caressing the body of the bow, as well as the bowstring. When she tried to pull the bowstring, a sharp arrow formed from starlight impressively appeared between the bowstring and the body of the bow. "It's yours, no doubt." "Without a doubt," Duque said to Queen Sylvia with a smile. "But, trust me, in the entire alliance, there's no one who can use this divine artifact better than you." Chapter 1536. It was a divine weapon. This was the first divine bow in the Alliance of Heroes. With the wind sword and balrog hammer, the other long-range professions were already envious. Duque's Atish was inherited, so there was nothing much to say. Therefore, the appearance of the first divine bow still made a few bow-wielding heroines envious. Actually, Tyrande was also an expert with a bow, but she was not only a ranger, but also a high priestess. Her starfall was what the big shots in the Alliance valued the most, which meant that she could only use the bow as a support attack. Her main source of income was still her divine arts. Originally, there were still people in the Alliance who could compete with Queen Syriana for this divine bow, but unfortunately, all of the remaining candidates had the surname Windrunner. Second sister, congratulations. I'm suddenly blaming myself for getting pregnant so early. In the mirror image of the magic transmission, it was the usually mature eldest sister, Aurelia, who pretended to be pounding her chest and stamping her feet. Second sister, you're indeed worthy of this divine bow. Sasha, on the other hand, didn't have much of an emotional reaction. She just gently caressed her slightly bulging belly. She who was the most active and active, had completely entered the role of a wife. It was hard to conceive a demigod's child, and after so long, the Windrunner sisters' bellies were at most the size of a 4-month pregnant human woman. The fourth sister, Lilith, didn't care much. After all, this was the glory of the Windrunner family. She calmly accepted the fact that her talent and achievements weren't as good as her 3 sisters. As the eldest and third sisters rested, she took on more of the task of long-range damage in the Alliance of Heroes. This time, defeating Kil'jaeden was more like a feast for the Alliance of Heroes. For example, Burning Justice, a plate armor helmet that strengthened intelligence and spirit, was naturally given to Hoof. After all, from now on, Riadaline had a companion. Of course, Holy Spirit Hammer. A hammer for healing paladins. Needless to say, everyone had one. The Van Cleef father and daughter each had a one-handed dagger, Apocalypse. Kil'jaeden's collection was so rich that even Duque, who entered the divine realm, couldn't avoid it. Of course, at his level, he would no longer simply collect equipment. He used a method similar to enchantment dismantling to dismantle the extra high-tier epic-level equipment. And by analyzing the magic buffs inside, he strengthened his own strength. For example, the mage robe that was solidified using ordinary tactics could withstand the slashes of ordinary swords. Then after using the tactics from Kill Jaden's collection, it could withstand the slashes of small electric saws. Even Duque couldn't help but be impressed by the Eridar family's tens of thousands of years of magical civilization. In just 10 minutes, the Alliance heroes finished splitting the loot. Actually, it wasn't a big deal. Equipment was divided by class. Heroes of the same class were basically all familiar faces. They would see each other all the time, so there was no point in stealing equipment. After all, if you got the best equipment, you would have the responsibility to rush to the front next time, or deal the most beautiful damage, and save every brother and sister that could be saved. Without Kill Jaden, cleaning up the battlefield and taking care of the surviving Void Lords was naturally left to Duque's group of elemental emissaries and semi-god subordinates. When the Alliance heroes finished splitting the loot, the entire Sunwell Highlands was already settled. They didn't simply kill all the demons. Other than the stubborn idiots, most of the demons, regardless of whether they were soldiers, elites, or demon lords, were captured. Ever since Azeroth had the warlock profession, it was much easier to enslave demons. Of course, these were demons that Duque's subordinates had spent a lot of effort to capture. He wouldn't just let anyone play with them. The Alliance leaders all knew that Duque was going to undergo stress training. Demons were powerful and scary, but even if they were given a three-dimensional image, it was far from being able to experience it for real. Before the first battle at the Dark Portal, Duque had used Naga to simulate orcs. Now he could directly use a genuine demon to teach the new recruits a lesson. The effect would definitely be perfect. Duque wouldn't use a bunch of demons to show off. He had long since ordered that they had to fight for real, be it mock battles or anything else. He hadn't even walked out of the Sunwell, and he had already set the battle loss ratio for the new recruits, 5%. It was better to eliminate unqualified fellows before they went to the battlefield than to have 50% of them wiped out as soon as they went on the battlefield. Even with the large-scale use of the cannons of Holy Light, the battle losses at the front line were still high. This was because the vitality, speed, and agility of the demons still exceeded the limits of many people's imagination. Of course, that was a story for later. At this moment, it was time to celebrate victory. The developed magic communication network allowed Duque and the others to transmit images to the entire Isle of Quel'Danas, all the major cities in the Alliance, and all the villages and towns with magic images the moment they stepped out of the gate of the Sunwell Highlands. Even the main halls of the leaders in the major cities of the tribe had a live broadcast of magic images. Almost the moment they saw Duque come out, the entire Alliance boiled over. People let out all kinds of cheers and screams. The commotion quickly subsided. The civilians suppressed the excitement in their hearts and prepared to listen to Duque's speech. On the Isle of Quel'Danas, in the Overwatch Castle, in the major cities of the Alliance, in the barracks, all the generals and soldiers raised their heads and raised their right hands in a military salute. Duque's direct servants, the Karakis and Nagas, bowed and knelt one after another, placing their right hands on their chest to show supreme respect to their master. A few seconds later, Duque's familiar voice echoed in everyone's ears. My compatriots of Azeroth, I'm pleased to announce that in the Battle of the Sunwell Highlands just now, we have once again thwarted the Burning Legion's plot to devour planet Azeroth. With the help of the goddess Elun, the Dragon Slumber Temple, and the other dragon aspects, we worked together and successfully killed the Burning Legion's commander, Kill Jaden. This time, the entire Alliance was really boiling. Long live the Alliance! Long live Commander Marcus! Praise Elun! Praise the dragon aspects! Azeroth is invincible! Countless people hugged the people around them and shed tears of emotion. The matter of the Sunwell was kept a secret. After the Alliance issued an emergency mobilization order, everyone subconsciously thought that it would be another protracted war. They didn't expect the Alliance to destroy the strong enemy so quickly and turn this terrifying war, which was likely to spread, into a lightning war. The Alliance was not afraid of war, but it didn't mean that they liked war. To be able to deal with the Burning Legion's surprise attack so cleanly was not only proof of their strength, but also a great achievement that was enough to make every Alliance person stand up straight and be proud. Chapter 1537. Duque continued. This battle is very dangerous, and it is not an exaggeration to say that it will affect the survival of planet Azeroth. If we really let Kil'jaeden descend, then we will all be finished. After saying that, Duque raised his hand, and in the palm of his hand, the scene of Kil'jaeden's body being stuck in the middle of Elun's attack, until he was defeated and killed, was presented to millions of people in the Alliance. Fortunately this time, because Her Majesty Sylvanas discovered it early, I was able to arrive in time and block Kil'jaeden's portal in advance. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. I know that this war was sudden, and the victory came surprisingly quickly. Even the main fleet of our alliance was still gathering, and the war was already over. I want to say that everyone's efforts were not in vain. If not for everyone's efforts, we would never know where the limit of our mobilization is. Without the experience of war, our army would not be able to grow, and we would not be able to protect our brothers and sisters, friends, fellow citizens. This is not the final ending. As long as the Twisted Nether is not completely destroyed, the demons can continue to resurrect. Yes, we succeeded in killing Kil'jaeden. However, this demon commander will resurrect again in 10 years at most. So our duty is not over, and our battle is not over. Building a strong army to protect us, and even the entire planet Azeroth, is a long way to go. For the happiness and future of our descendants, please continue to support the Alliance. Dooku's words were met with thunderous applause and cheers that rose to the heavens. Following that, after the leaders of the Alliance gave their respective speeches, another triumphant return ceremony was decided. The Alliance was overjoyed, and the Horde was shocked. Originally, the Horde was skeptical of the Alliance's claim that they could handle it, and Sal had even begun to mobilize for war. Although the Alliance and the Horde were now on good terms, they were not in the same boat after all. And if the Alliance failed, Azeroth would be finished, and the Horde would also suffer. Sal could not put all his hopes on the Alliance. Now that the Alliance had won, Sal heaved a sigh of relief. The consecutive years of war had caused the fragile economic system of the tribe to collapse. Now they were completely relying on the blood transfusion of the Alliance to provide them with a large amount of food, wood for building houses, and daily necessities that amounted to tens of thousands of tons every month. That was how they managed to maintain the operation of the entire tribe. Hearing that the Alliance had won, Sal immediately contacted Duque to congratulate him. Even after the call ended, Sal still received congratulations from the Alliance ambassador. Back in Orgrimmar, Varrock Salyafar and Wujin sighed a little. It was especially so for Varrock. Unknowingly, the batch of beastmen who had participated in the Battle of the Dark Portal had grown old. However, not only did the Alliance grow stronger by the day, the leader of the Alliance, Duque, still looked like a young man. Varrock was stunned for a moment before he remembered that Duque's age was fixed at 18 because of his eternal life. Varrock sighed softly. Fortunately, my son is starting to grow up. In the tribe, the one who was the most shocked was the Sun King, Anastrian. His withered palms trembled. Duke Marcus didn't find out, right? He shouldn't have. Damn, why are the Burning Legion's leaders so weak? Are they all useless? The 3 leaders all died at the hands of Duque. Ever since he had become a dead man, the Sun King thought that he had forgotten the feeling of fear. The undead should not be afraid. He was wrong. Very wrong. Even his soul was trembling now. He had joined the Burning Legion because he believed that the Legion would win. In his opinion, it would be strange if the Legion could not win. The powerful and endless number of demons was not something that the Alliance, which only had a few million soldiers, could fight against. Not to mention the Alliance, even the Sleeping Dragon Temple and Elun would not be enough. As long as the demon army entered Azeroth, it was only a matter of time before the entire planet was flattened. However, the Sun King did not take into account the 2 factors of traitors and traitors. With the help of the Eridar Gemini, Duke managed to turn what could have been an all-out war into a war that could have been controlled in terms of intensity and scope. This forced the Sun King into an extremely awkward and frightening situation. The Forsaken had relied on the tribe's protection to escape the Alliance's pursuit and settle down. Once the tribe found out that the Sun King had let a wolf into the house, Sal would never forgive him and the Forsaken. It was very likely that the tribe would clean up before the Alliance did anything. This was not impossible. Duque had already informed the tribe about the void battlefield. As the 5-color guardian dragons had concentrated their firepower on Kill Jaden, many defensive points in the void battlefield had been broken. A large number of demons had descended. Although these demons were not strong, the tribe had begun to receive reports of attacks. These trivial matters would undoubtedly hinder the tribe's revitalization plan and make the great chief Sal even angrier. I hope the 2 female demons in Kill Jaden don't betray me. The Sun King could only hope that Kill Jaden would still think of him and support him after he was resurrected, instead of betraying him. Anastrian did not know that his little thoughts had already fallen into Duque's eyes. Furthermore, the female demons he had high hopes for had long sold him out. The Eridar twins, who had successfully jumped ship to Duque's side, were now busy. They first secretly found Tyrant, who had used the portal to run to the Karazhan to prepare for a victory celebration. They're looking for me. Tyrant felt that it was strange that the Eridar twins were looking for her. Should we ask them to leave? Feathermoon General Chandries asked, gritting her teeth. Let them in. Tyrant sighed. At least I know them. Although it's an ill-fated relationship. Tyrant would never forget that she had almost been forced to become an ex by these 2 female demons in the ancient war. After all, these 2 were now Duque's subordinates. It was not a big deal to meet them in private. As soon as they met, we are here to apologize for our offense against you in the ancient war. This is one of our treasures. We have no use for it. Why don't we give it to you, mistress? Tyrant's pupils constricted when she saw it. Even she had such an expression on her face, let alone Chandries, who was guarding the side. This is, Elises immediately replied. This is a gift from Queen Azhara when we went to Azhara. Saloras said. This is the crystallization of the wisdom of the High Elves. High Elven Golden Bough, or rather the Kuel Salis Golden Bough, in history. Chapter 1538. Be it Solidar Wrath of the Stars, or this Golden Bough, they were both made by High Elven craftsmen. High Elven Golden Bough was extremely beautiful. Because they came from the same source, it had the same style. The Golden Bough also had a large gauntlet that looked like an arm shield. The gauntlet had the totem of a fire phoenix on it. The bough that extended from the gauntlet was made into the shape of a golden dragon eagle. It had a red background with golden edges. The eagle's head was lifelike, and the beak was connected to the edge of the gauntlet. Further out from the eagle-shaped bough were 2 green curved scythe-like blades on top and bottom. Together with the golden bow's shape, the golden bough could be treated as a slightly weaker version of Azanatha's warblade. What attracted Tyrant the most was the history of this bough. This was the pinnacle of High Elven craftsmanship from 10,000 years ago. Although she did not want to admit it, after the destruction of Azhara, this level of craftsmanship was lost. Tyrant gently caressed the bough, a thoughtful expression on her face. Finally, she let out a long sigh. I'll accept your kindness. The Gemini were not acting. They were truly relieved. Duque had forced them to betray him, but he had never promised them any benefits after they jumped ship. Either way, they would be dead meat if they did not jump ship. Perhaps there would be some hope if they did. The smart Gemini did not want to bet their lives on Duque's mercy, so they decisively started their public relations operation. Their first stop was obviously Tyrant. Now that Tyrant had accepted the gift, the most difficult part had been resolved. Tyrant sat on the sofa with her legs crossed. The White Moon Priest's robe made her look even more outstanding. The Gemini could not associate this noble woman in front of them with the female captive who had almost fallen into depravity in the War of the Ancients. If they were enemies, the Gemini would have done anything to cause trouble. But now they were not even grandchildren. Tyrant glanced at the Gemini who were still kneeling on the floor and smiled. Actually, I have to thank you. If not for you, I might have had no choice but to choose between my 2 childhood friends. That way, no matter which one I chose, the other would have been greatly hurt. Since things ended well back then, I have no intention of pursuing the matter. I just want to remind you. Gemini hurriedly bowed and kowtowed, her posture extremely humble. What do you think? Please instruct me. Tyrant smiled, as if she was organizing her thoughts. A few seconds later, she said slowly, "There was once a black dragon who was sinister and cunning. He wanted to infiltrate the alliance and take control of the entire alliance. She almost succeeded. However, in the end, she gave up all her plans and willingly became a mount. Do you know why?" Tyrande was naturally referring to the Black Dragon Princess, Onyxia. To be honest, Gemini was also a little curious about this matter. Tyrande's face was filled with fervent conviction, because she said that going against Duke Marcus is the same as going against the god of fate. Rather than being crushed and destroyed by fate, it's better to become the god of fate's subordinate. After saying this, Tyrande waved her hand, and Chandrise immediately stood between her and Gemini. She was sending them off. The Gemini twins were shocked. They had too much shock that they had yet to digest. As a pair of cunning female demons, they had too many tricks up their sleeves. They never really wanted to rely on Duque. From start to finish, it was a choice made out of helplessness. In fact, they didn't even think that Duque would be able to kill Jaden. Duque had once again fought a beautiful battle, cleanly killing the most sinister and cunning demon in the Burning Legion. He didn't even give Jaden the slightest chance. Of course, part of this was because they had betrayed their boss. However, the important things like timing, whether to trust the information, and making decisions were all handled by Duque alone. More importantly, Duque's subordinates and his harem were all united. This gave the Gemini twins a huge headache. As long as the Burning Legion was not completely destroyed, they had to live under Duque's protection. Otherwise, they would have to gamble that the Legion would not be able to find them. Unfortunately, in the past 25,000 years, there were only two groups of demons that the Legion could not catch even if they wanted to. One was Valen's Drenii, and the other was Duque's Mark Dooku. The entire Legion knew how miserable Valen and his tribesmen were when they were being hunted down. Duque was the only one who made the Legion depressed for 10,000 years. This was because this guy ran away after acting cool. How exciting! This 10,000 years of reincarnation made the Gemini twins a little nervous. They had second thoughts. If Duque blamed them, wouldn't that mean? The Gemini twins didn't dare to imagine it. At this time, they didn't dare to look for Duque either. They knew very well that they didn't have anything that Duque had to rely on. In fact, Duque didn't have the time either. He was ambushed in his own bedroom. Sneak attack. He directly used cut to replace the armor. In fact, Duque gave up on resisting when he saw the huge blue blade. As for the last move, the 5-star charm, it was an additional critical hit. Well, it was that simple to defeat a demigod. Duque, who was lying on his back, looked at Servanas with some embarrassment. Duque was very sure that he didn't have the paladin's anti-damage skill, so why did Queen Moushi look like her armor had been broken? A leather armor good rating. Short cloak and boots good rating. Holding the divine longbow, Solidar Wrath of the Stars bad rating. Initiative plus 100% rating. At this moment, Queen Maushi's face had a fanatical excitement. "Excuse me, have you become a berserker?" Servanas raised her chin 45 degrees and gave Duque a provocative look. "Come on. We've demigod Duque, show me your divine sword. Let me tell you. Tonight, I swear to slay a god. Oh. If you don't clean up after 3 days, you're going to tear the roof tiles off." Duque sneered. Just you. I'm not afraid even if you 3 sisters attack together. Not to mention you. You're courting death." Queen Moushi blushed. At most, I'll fight again and again." Since the dual flag had fallen from the sky, he couldn't blame anyone else for suffering the consequences. Duque's divine sword began to show its ferocious power. Die. Admit defeat. You're no match for me. This was, of course, a certain demigod's boasting. No, I'll never admit defeat. An hour passed. Hey, can you still do it? If you can't, don't call yourself a god slayer. You bastard, if you're so good, don't use your demigod body. Queen Mao continued to be stubborn. Fine, we'll talk about it later. It turned out that Queen Maushi's damage output depended on her roar. No. Chapter 1539. Apart from Aurelia and Sasha, Duque found a chance to clean up his harem. Of course, Duque used Master's Gift, and Dragon Taming Skill, on Vashj and Onyxia, who performed outstandingly in the Well of the Sun incident. When Duque carefully studied the female Naga's blood rush in her high elf form, as well as the exploration in the dragon's lair, Duque put on his coat and went to the study to take stock of the current situation of the Alliance. It was now the 25th year of the Dark Portal. Although the major events in history happened as expected, the current situation of the Alliance was very different from history. First of all, the 7 human kingdoms were either still alive, or like Stromgard, they had begun to rebuild their capital, the Riptide Fortress. Not only had their vitality been preserved, but it had also improved greatly compared to history. Secondly, it was the geographical advantage. After the battle at the Well of the Sun, it could basically be said that the entire Eastern Kingdom was united. Why did it say basically? Although the Amani trolls were cleared in the Lordaeron continent, the remaining trolls went south into the hinterlands and merged with the trolls there. They used the complicated terrain and tunnels to confront the wild hammer dwarves in the Eagle's Nest Mountain. Tunnel warfare was a huge problem since ancient times. For the sake of survival, the trolls shamelessly played tunnel warfare. There was really no good solution. The only thing they could do was to let the Bronzebeard dwarves work together with the wild hammer dwarves to slowly push forward. Duque had a better idea, but he needed time. Gilnis, the only one among the 7 human kingdoms who did not join the Alliance, was still playing with himself. After all, they were all humans. Duque could not force Xion Grameen to join the Alliance. That would not be in line with the purpose of the Alliance. Moreover, Gilnis would destroy himself sooner or later. When Xion became the Alpha Wolf, the Alliance could completely consolidate its rule in Lordaeron. After 10 years, the plague and corrosion in the northern Lordaeron were basically purified by the Cenarian Circle's druids. Food production and population were recovering. Overall, the Lordaeron continent did not have much of a problem. The situation in the southern continent was much more complicated. Although Duque had always hoped that the Bronzebeard dwarves could occupy more territory, it was actually too much. Magni and his brothers were very impressive. The Alliance's largest weapons center was at Steelstove Castle, and so was the Technology Center. Almost all of the flying ships and cannons were in charge of Steelstove Castle. Although the dwarves' fertility rate wasn't low, it was only relative to the elves. With the Bronzebeard dwarves' small population, after occupying Iron Furnace Castles Dan Moror, Loch Moden in the east, the wetlands in the northeast, the barren lands in the southeast, and the original Scorching Canyon, Magni made a vow: I don't want any more territory. The bronze-bearded dwarves had little need for territory. Their hobbies were more focused on forging and climbing the technology tree. They even returned the wetlands fortress of Grim Battle to their brother, the Wildhammer dwarves. Duque really didn't know if he should warn the Wildhammer dwarves. Sooner or later, someone would cause trouble in the Twilight Highlands to their east. The southern end of the southern continent was flooded due to the molten core. The Burning Steppes no longer lived up to its name. This was because a large river originated from the Black Rock Mountain and ran from west to east across the entire plain. It flowed from the foot of the Raging Flame Peak in the middle of the plain to the barren land. The Burning Steppes was previously covered in thick volcanic ash. Now that there was water, and the volcanic ash itself was rich in minerals, this made the Burning Steppes the most fertile land in the whole of Stormwind. William was overjoyed. Originally, William was still wondering if he should negotiate with Duque to take the Redridge Mountains under the direct jurisdiction of the kingdom, so that the royal family's territories could be linked together. Duque found it troublesome, so he gave William a brilliant idea: to dig a hole in the mountains in the north of the Elven Forest and open 2 large tunnels, one for carriages and the other for trains, directly to the southwest of the Burning Steppes. The territory is yours and I'll pay for it. That's generous enough, right? William, of course, accepted this suggestion happily. According to the current level of engineering technology, it would only take 1 or 2 years for the tunnels to open. This was because during his tenure, William had defeated the great demons who worshipped Hakkar and occupied Zul'Gurub. Now he had added the huge fertile land of the Burning Steppes to Stormwind. In Stormwind, many people had already started to call William the Holy King. In fact, since ancient times, The kings who could leave a good name in history were those who defended against foreign enemies and opened up new lands. William had achieved both of them, and his name in the annals of history was set in stone. The praise of the people also made William proud. It was said that he almost gave his son, the infamous dirty shepherd Anduin Rin, a brother. In the southern continent, most of the great demons had become specimens. Before the Battle of Ankiraj, Duque had purposely cleansed Stormwind and his own private army. Firstly, there was indeed a reason for the cleansing, and secondly, Duque was not interested in leaving behind future troubles. If these fellows suddenly turned over a new leaf and claimed to be converted to the Horde, with the current relationship between the Alliance and the Horde, Cao could ask for them from Duque, and Duque would be too embarrassed to refuse. Since the remnants of Zul Gurub still believed in Hacker, then sorry, please go on your way. However, there was a troll clan that Duque could not lay his hands on. That was the Zandalar trolls. These wise trolls from the era of the Dark Empire were not only wise, but could also play with magic. When the Alliance was clearing out the Zul Gurub trolls, they had also put in a lot of effort and led the way. Furthermore, they occupied a palm-sized island in the sea west of Stranglethorn Vale, so the Alliance really had no reason to deal with them. They might as well establish a neutral race. They would not bully them, nor would they allow them to open up new territories in the Eastern Kingdom. With the destruction of Zul Gurub, Stranglethorn Vale was divided equally between Stormwind and Kul Tiras. After the city of Booty Bay was built, they would be able to sleep peacefully. As for the Kalimdor continent, the support and suppression of the Horde was currently being planned. Finally, there was only one problem left. Arthas. Duque sat on the bench and let out a long sigh. If the gears of history did not change, then in at most 1 or 2 years, the Lich King would wake up from his long sleep, and Arthas' dark personality would take control of the body, preparing to launch an invasion. Naxxramas, who was supposed to be Arthas' vanguard, was already in the hands of the Alliance, so there was only one card left that was worth Duque's attention. With a thought from Duque's soul, the Eridar twins immediately came in eagerly. "Master, you were looking for us." He looked at the twins, who were wearing a translucent black veil-made uniform, and had an exquisite figure. Duque smiled and pretended not to see them. "I have an important task for you." Chapter 1540. Enslaving a demon was like playing with fire. In the original history, the Doomsday Guards that the Warlocks enslaved would have to be tested every once in a while. If the Warlock's willpower was not strong enough, the Big Brother would break free and slap the Warlock's face. It was not until later on when the Warlock's magic developed that there was semi-permanent enslavement. The story told Duque that he should never believe that he could completely control a demon, and he should never judge a demon's values by the logic of an ordinary person. Although the Eridar Gemini looked like they were about to die, they would definitely sell him out as soon as they lost the pressure from Kil'jaeden, or if they thought that they had a better way. Reality proved that even soul restraint was not that reliable. Since Duque could cut off a part of their souls, the enemy could do the same thing in the future, and instigate the Gemini to betray him. The Eridar tribe had been with the Burning Legion for 25,000 years, and had completely become a branch of the demons. Therefore, the Gemini could use them but not put them in an important position. However, the Black Sickle Council was made up entirely of warlocks. With the history of the Eridar Gemini enslaving the Eridar Gemini as a reference, Duque knew very well how to use the 2 female demons. Thud. Duque threw a document on the ground. Duque had never been one to overdo such arrogance, but it was a great deterrent to the Gemini. The seemingly gentle smile turned into a sneer in the Gemini's eyes. The Gemini thought to herself, "He must be complaining that we didn't directly participate in the battle against Kil'jaeden," and drew a line with the Burning Legion. The Gemini, who was kneeling on the ground, moved her knees and crawled over to pick up the document. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They were still useful to Duque. "Saloras, the Doomsday Army's bones will soon spread the plague. You'll be in charge of the Lordaeron region. You'll be in charge of infiltrating the tribe's warlocks." The Gemini, who was initially a little anxious, immediately became flirtatious. Even her voice sounded flirtatious. "Do you have any special orders, Master?" Duque thought it was funny. Originally, During the final battle with the Burning Legion in history, the bosses of each profession had their own performances. Warlocks were the worst of them all, as a single demon lord had almost annihilated the Black Sickle Council. The others would have invited the Elemental Lords, or the former Torbane King of Torrent Fort. However, the new Black Sickle Council was so poor that they could only send the Eridar Gemini to be the vanguard. Charging at the front was Gemini's final choice. If they could, they absolutely hated fighting. Therefore, Duque didn't need them to fight for him, which was very considerate of him. Dealing with the Envoy of Calamity, who spread the plague, was like fighting poison with poison. As a scheming female demon, of course, she knew how to infiltrate in the most secretive and effective way. Infiltration was the Gemini's favorite activity. Seeing that her own sister was playing infiltration while she could only play with bones, even Queen Solola's showed a little envious expression. Duque did not look at Solola's. He only stared at Elisa's. Sal has begun to study the path of elements. In fact, this was in conflict with the Warlock path. I have no intention of dealing with Sal. However, in the future, Sal is destined to be unable to suppress the more traditional young faction in the tribe. Once Sal gives up his position due to some unforeseen event, such as an elemental riot, I will need a key chess piece. Ever since the Eridar Gemini decided to rely on Duque, they had done a lot of homework. They had to understand the current situation of the Alliance, such as the situation of the tribe. It was precisely because the Alliance was completely united that no force other than Duque could affect the overall situation. That was why they were so respectful of their new master. The tribe was different. At first glance, the tribe had gained more than 2 million orcs, allowing the orcs to become the absolute core race of the tribe in one fell swoop. This made the tribe even more powerful. It didn't feel bad, did it? In reality, the tribe was now really in a precarious situation. Sal had saved so many orcs from the old tribe from the dead land of Draenor. In a short period of time, every orc would be deeply grateful to Sal. However, after a long time it would be a different story. The orcs of the traditional tribe were typical nomadic people. They would migrate to wherever there was prey. However, a complete and thriving food chain needed fertile land to support it. First, there had to be grass, then there were small and medium-sized herbivores, and then there were large carnivores. The current territory of the tribe was all on the Kalimdor continent of Azeroth. The Forgotten's Winterspring, the Tauren's Thunder Cliff, the Troll's Echo Islands, and the Shining Plains, which was now controlled by the Rustwater conglomerate. Putting aside the territories of other tribes, the areas directly controlled by the orcs were now very barren. Duroder, the Barren Lands, the Thousand Needles, and half of Stonettlin Mountain. Among them, Stonettlin Mountain had a territorial dispute with the Night Elves. In the entire Kalimdor continent, there were not many areas for the tribe to expand. The northern Night Elves occupied Azhara, Grey Valley, Fellwood Forest, Black Sea Coast, and Mount Hyjal, completely cutting off the tribe's space to expand north. The two main cities of Exodar and Darnassus, which were in the northwest, were warning the tribe not to play with their navy here. In the east, Theramore was stuck in the middle of the tribe's territory like a nail, like a fish bone stuck in the throat, making the tribe very uncomfortable. In the south, Gadgetzan in the Great Tanaris Desert was a neutral trade zone. The goblins there and the Rustwater conglomerate were not on the same side. After the Karaji Insect Empire turned to Duque, they regained their foothold and, together with the Cenarian Circle, mixed with the Hot Sand group of Gadgetzan, and jointly developed the Ungoro Crater. Originally, the Hot Sand group was quite angry when they lost Booty Bay. The problem was that the Alliance gave the Hot Sand group a chance, but they couldn't get it back by sending troops. After the Alliance occupied Booty Bay, they didn't return it to the Hot Sand group. Kul Dylas was ready to make it the new capital. The goblins were not so good-tempered. Even Sal and Wajin were ready to watch the show at that time. Who knew that Duque and Jaina would be so shameless? They directly knocked out the Hot Sand group with a stick in gold. Booty Bay was fought by the trolls. If you don't have the ability to fight back, don't talk nonsense here. It's obvious that you can't handle it yourself, so the Alliance killed the trolls. The Alliance took the Deepwater port from the trolls with their strength. Why should the Alliance return it? If you make any more noise, we will take it as a declaration of war against the Alliance. All pro-alliance forces, including the Bronze Dragon and the Kiraji Insect Empire, will launch an attack on Gadget-san. Are you convinced? At this point, what else could the Hot Sand Group do? They couldn't beat the alliance, so they could only surrender to the couple, Duque and Jaina. The stick shocked the goblins, so it was naturally a sweet date. The alliance needs a lot of minerals, volcanic soil, rare earth. Let's develop the Ongoro crater together. Chapter 1541. Most goblins only recognized money. In the eyes of most goblins, the Horde was poor. How could they be as rich as the alliance? What's more, the three richest families in the alliance were the Kurtiras, Alterac and Marcus families. The three families almost shared the same purse. Offending one was offending all three, and the alliance's leader was still the demigod Duque. There was no need to say how the Hot Sand Group would choose. The defection of the Hot Sand Group directly made the Horde's southern expansion a bubble. After all, the Rustwater conglomerate could not go to war with its own compatriots for the Horde. The only way to expand was to the west, the desolate land in Feralas. The former was ownerless, while the latter was occupied by a group of neutral forces that were not under the Alliance's protection, such as the arena slave owners who had sold William as a slave gladiator. In the past, Sal would have handled the relationship with these neutral forces more carefully. Unfortunately, the food pressure brought by more than 2 million orcs was so great that Sal could not breathe. The Horde could not rely on the Alliance's food support, and the Alliance's food was mainly cereals, which was not suitable for the traditional orc's appetite. Duque was generous and did not mind exporting pig-raising technology to the Horde. Unfortunately, breeding was also an industry with a knack. If you wanted to raise pigs, you had to at least have pig feed, right? After half a circle, it was actually back to the old problem. The land was too barren, and there was no industrial base and scientific knowledge. The Alliance would give the Horde a limited blood transfusion, but would never teach the Horde to produce blood. Sal was determined and directly launched a war involving hundreds of thousands of orcs. The first war started in Durotor, and the Horde directly used human wave tactics to destroy the Centaur tribe entrenched in the south of Durotor. Then two fronts, one south and one north, swept through the desolate land in Feralas at the same time. It was worth mentioning that a newcomer rose in the Horde. He was Gurus Hellscream, the son of Lord Howl Grom. Gurus was born in Draenor's orc home garden Nagrand. His growth was not contaminated by the demonic blood flowing in the invading Azeroth orcs. Although he was not affected by the corruption, Gurus had always lived under the shadow of his past. His father, Grom, was the first orc to be corrupted by drinking the blood of Manaroth, the Lord of the Abyss. Gurus had been ashamed of his father's actions until he met Thrall, the Great Chief. The founder of the revived tribe told the young Gurus about how his father had fought bravely against the Lord of the Abyss, Manaroth, in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and how his father had swept through the Molten Core and killed the traitor Blackhand brothers in Blackwing's nest. Finally, after the Battle of Ahn'Qiraj, he could no longer fight and had to retreat to the second line. Unlike the original history, the original Master Ho's merits and demerits were equal, and he was worthy of respect. However, in this life, Master Ho's merits outweighed his faults. As the founder of the new tribe, Master Howl used the extra time he had to live to add even more heroism to his heroic legend. If there was anything Gurush disliked about his father, it was that he had sworn to serve a human demigod after his death. Generally speaking, Gurush worshipped his father. Gurush then followed Thrall to Azeroth as an advisor. Soon, he was appointed as the leader of the Warsong clan's vanguard to wipe out the Centaurs. The courage, tenacity, and warlike he showed on the battlefield left a deep impression on the other members of the tribe. At the same time, they were worried about Gurush's indifference to the opinions of the members of the tribe who were not orcs. Not to mention, he deeply hated the Alliance. Even if the Alliance provided the tribe with transportation to evacuate Draenor. This was obviously contrary to the current mainstream multiracial integration of the tribe, as well as the friendly policy with the Alliance. Thrall saw this, but he had no reason to punish such a young and vigorous orc. In fact, most of the orcs from Draenor had such a temper. Thrall was now in a difficult situation. However, he still had to deal with Gerald. The demigod Gruul was not a good-tempered master, The only fortunate thing was that he chose to focus on the desolate land instead of the lush Feralas region, which the tribe was more optimistic about. When Duque briefly explained the situation of the tribe to the Gemini's mind filled in a lot of things. Does Master want auras to destroy the entire tribe by controlling the warlocks of the tribe? Not to mention auras, even Solola's was eager to try. The Gemini was the best at this kind of thing. Duque raised his index finger and shook it. This is too low-end. The words low-end made the Gemini's face turn red. Didn't this mean that their methods were not good? Duque pondered for a moment, then said directly, fate seems to be impermanent and irregular. In fact, the general trend of fate was decided the moment the leader made a choice. The Alliance will not take the initiative to destroy the tribe. Doing so will only make the Burning Legion happy. The power of Azeroth should not be weakened, because in 10 years at most, a full-scale war will start. But the division and conflict of the tribe was destined from the moment Thrall took in 2 million orcs to Azeroth. This rift will only get bigger and bigger. In fact, the Alliance does not need to do anything special at all. They only need to know the necessary information to be able to act at the best time and reap the greatest benefits. It's like ambushing Kil'jaeden. When Duque said this, the Gemini's heart trembled at the same time. This time, they finally understood that the difference between them and Duque was not in strength, nor was it in controlling souls, but in the realm of thinking. Just like this time, Kil'jaeden put in a lot of effort, and did not hesitate to let Illidan go. Even when the Alliance besieged the Outland, he remained silent, so that he could secretly set up a portal to the Well of the Sun to sneak in. After plotting so many schemes and spending so much time, in the end, wasn't it all because of Duke's crucial point, directly causing him to fly into the sky? This kind of taking advantage of the enemy's plots and conflicts to achieve the greatest results with the least amount of effort was the highest level of planning. If Kil'jaeden was a chess player with the universe as his chessboard, then Duque should be the chess king, right? Suddenly, for the first time in their lives, the Gemini felt a sense of fear towards Duque. Could it be that Duque was really the god of fate that Tyron spoke of? The Gemini retreated. Soon, Duque summoned a second group of people. It was the Shorty King's group. The 3 Bronzebeard brothers, Cudrin Wildhammer, and the great craftsman Jurban. Duque said immediately, the Alliance is now like a war machine. Once the machine stops, it will be difficult to restart it. So the machine can turn slowly, but it cannot stop. I have a plan now. That is the Fearless Fortress. Chapter 1542. Fearless Fortress. Just the name alone was enough to make one's blood boil. All of a sudden, the breathing of the Dwarf Kings quickened, especially Muradin. He had been betrayed by Arthas, whom he had once regarded as his best friend. This was a humiliation that would never fade from his face. Arthas was not completely depraved when he pulled out Frostmourne. It was one thing not to finish Muradin off. Betraying Muradin was another. Not only Duke, but even Magni noticed that his second brother's fists were clenched so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard. Brother. His eldest brother's call made Muradin return to normal. Sorry, I forgot myself. Seeing Muradin's quick reply, the other 2 brothers smiled. Magni patted Muradin's shoulder. This is the Bronzebeard family's rock. Rock solid. This was a compliment for dwarves. Then Magni nodded at Duque. Duque announced, good. As for the construction and defense of the Fearless Fortress, I'll leave it to Cudrin, Muradin, and Jurban. Cudrin will be the commander of the Fearless Fortress. It was a very reasonable arrangement. Cudrin was the real king, so he was naturally the leader. Jurban was in charge of technology, and Muradin was in charge of the army. It was a very reasonable arrangement. Duque turned to Bulang. Bring Naxxramas to cover the construction of the Fearless Fortress. Of course, you won't be the only one to cover the troops. With a thought from Duque, the door to the study opened again. 2 energetic elves walked in. The elemental waves on their bodies were so strong that they could be seen with the naked eye, and attracted the attention of others. It was naturally Vashj and Kael, that's the 2 who had a difficult life in history, falling into the path of evil, and finally being destroyed at this point in time, had now become the backbone of the Alliance. Duque was truly amazed at the wonders of fate. Duque smiled. Kale, I was busy dealing with Kill Jaden, so I haven't told you about the crusade against Arthas. But I think you'll be happy to come. The handsome former prince had become more mature after going through so much. His jade-like face had a determination that had never been seen before. Of course I'm willing. For our dead comrades. For that unforgettable history. For the future of Azeroth. I will not shirk my duty. Good. Bulang's face lit up. With a Breaking Dawn mage who was the closest to becoming a demigod overseeing things, it was much safer. Duke looked at Vashj again. He did not say anything and just nodded. It was precisely because they were familiar with each other that there was no need for words. This sense of intimacy and trust made Vashj even more excited with a mixture of sweetness and fanaticism. In her elven form, Vashj twirled the corners of her skirt with both hands and performed a maidservant's bow. At this point, the early preparations for the expedition to No Scent were already perfect. Duque concluded. Lich King Nazul's will was not strong. After the fusion, it should be dominated by the will of the former Arthas. I have to say, Arthas is quite a talented fellow. Arthas will be very patient. But patience didn't mean waiting for death. Thus, my request is to complete the preparations for the Allied army's attack on Northrend without provoking Earthies to wake up early. The Alliance needs a large batch of griffins and hippogriffs that can adapt to extreme cold weather. We need a feasible plan to quickly build a railway. We also need a forward operating base that can accommodate 500,000 troops. Everyone, let me emphasize again. This is a war between the living and the dead. There is no way out of this. Please be extremely cautious. Most of the people present had experienced the third battle of the Dark Portal, or were strong people who had already proven themselves on the battlefield. There was not even a single newbie. In addition, they had more or less worked together before, so there was no problem at all. After Duque decided on the candidates, they automatically entered the state and began to discuss countermeasures. Duque was very satisfied with this situation. The Alliance indeed had him as the core, but it was not an incompetent organization that had to ask him for instructions for everything. After 25 years of campaigning, the leaders of the Alliance, other than the hooligans, were all amazing people who could take charge of an area. Moreover, Duque had more important things to do. After Kudrin and the others left, Duque entered a state of meditation on the highest floor of the Karazhan Mage Tower. System Elf, establish an analysis model. Divide the entire process of my battle with Kill Jaden into different modules, with elemental fluctuations, magic circuit operation, external energy exchange, energy compression and expansion as the standard. I need to fully analyze the magic of the Eridar family and strengthen their control over the elements. The initial standard is true god level. In addition, I also need to establish a spatial model. I need to fully scan the entire planet Azeroth. I don't want the space barrier to be broken at will again. That's right. Duque found that the space barrier of Azeroth was getting more and more troublesome. Before Medivh was possessed by Sargeras and opened the Dark Portal, the intelligent creatures of Azeroth had a comfortable life. Ever since Oldmai was possessed and started to cause trouble, the space barrier of Azeroth had been getting worse day by day. There were internal and external reasons, so it was understandable that everyone hated Medivh. Of course, Duque didn't have the time to care about these old scores. The problem in front of him now was that the Blue Dragon King Malygos seemed to want to cause trouble. As the first person in Azeroth to be granted a magic position by the Titans, Malygos had always regarded himself as the ultimate ruler of magic. During the ancient war 10,000 years ago, he was extremely dissatisfied with the High Elves' abuse of magic, which led to the Burning Legion. The first Well of Eternity exploded, splitting the continent of ancient Kalimdor into 4 large pieces, causing devastating damage to the planet's environment. The Well of Eternity on Mount Hyjal also exploded, blowing up the entire mountaintop, and causing irreversible damage to the surrounding ecology. Now even the Well of the Sun was being spied on, and Kill Jaden was almost let in. It was hard to say whether Malygos would act on a whim, as he had done in history. After all, in the original history, his wife had died and his children were gone. His once lively family had now become desolate, and the ones who did this were his brothers who had been through life and death with him. This was a huge blow, and it directly caused Malygos to become crazy. His mind was extremely unstable, and he didn't care about the Guardian of Magic at all. Just like that, he went crazy for almost 10,000 years, until he absorbed part of the Nether Dragon's essence by chance, and unexpectedly regained his sanity. But who knew that Malygos might have been crazy for too long? And he actually figured out a set of logic to convince himself. This set of logic was, mortals use magic to cause disasters, and disasters will destroy Azeroth. I'm the Guardian Dragon of Azeroth, so I want to ban mortals from using magic and destroy all magic creations. Chapter 1543. However, would Malygos still do the same in this life? Duke couldn't help but put a huge question mark on his head. After all, I've already avenged you, Elder Malygos. Nethario, the Wing of Death, was already 3 feet tall. And more than 20 years ago, no one really knew what kind of indescribable cruelty you did when you returned with Nethario's dragon head. You've avenged yourself, so theoretically, you shouldn't be so resentful anymore, right? Duke really couldn't make up his mind, so he could only ask Alexstrasza for help. When the human form of the red dragon appeared in the magic communication mirror, Duke directly asked his question. Right, does Malygos have any opinions about the Sunwell incident? The queen put her hands on her hips and said helplessly, he's been throwing a tantrum recently. He said that the Well of Eternity and the Sunwell are scourges, and that we, the dragon aspect, can't guard against thieves no matter how hard we try. When Duke heard this, his heart skipped a beat, and he cursed inwardly. It was hard to guard against thieves day and night. If Malygos insisted on treating the Well of Eternity and the Sunwell as thieves, then it wouldn't be a good thing. The Well of Eternity had been blown up twice, and there was nothing left. Although the Blood Elves wouldn't use the Sunwell specifically now, what if Malygos interfered and said that the Blue Dragons would take care of it? Should he give it or not? If he gave it, where would Sylvanas put her face as a queen? If he didn't, what if Malygos got angry and ordered the Blue Dragon Legion to attack Silvermoon City? Silvermoon City's defense was not bad, but that was only at the level of mortals. Even though the elites of the Blue Dragons were wiped out because of Nethario's betrayal in the Ancient War, they could still pull out 8 or 10 adult dragons. If the young dragons and fledglings were included, there would be even more. Once the war with the Blue Dragon Legion started, the alliance was bound to stand on the side of the elves. At that time, how would the Dragon Sleep Temple be dealt with? In any case, the best choice was to eliminate the conflict before it started. Otherwise, when it came to the point of life and death, no matter which choice was made, it would still be Azeroth that would suffer in the end. Every time a dragon aspect died, the planet's protection array would weaken. Even if he found a successor, the new would not be as good as the old. For example, Onyxia was just there to make up the numbers. Having her was better than nothing. Dragons had their own way of thinking, and it was difficult for Duke to figure out what Malygos was thinking. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh and express his worry. Alexstrasza, you and I have known each other for so long, and you know that. I've always prioritized the safety of Azeroth. I have never wished to judge my own people with the greatest malice. But I've never been able to talk to Malygos, and I'm really worried that he'll go too far this time. You mean, if? I said if. Duke emphasized. If Malygos insists that the Sunwell is a scourge, I can agree to seal it on behalf of Queen Sylvanas. However, he definitely couldn't hand over the task of guarding this place to the Blue Dragon tribe, at least not on the surface. Do you understand what I mean? When Duke said this, Alexstrasza's eyes lit up, and her bright pupils shone with a dazzling light. As expected. I knew you had a better idea. Only now was the Red Dragon Queen willing to tell the truth. Actually, since the day they defeated Kil'jaeden, Malygos had been throwing a tantrum in the Dragon Slumber Temple and smashing several side halls. He was really shouting that mortals were not qualified to use such terrifying magic. Duke secretly compared it and found that Malygos was slightly milder than in the original history. At least he didn't claim that mortals were not even qualified to use magic. However, Malygos proposed to put all magic users under supervision. For example, all humans and elves should be connected to Duque's magic net, and all mages should be regulated. All spellcasters who did not connect to the magic net should be killed upon discovery to prevent future trouble. Now this was because Duque had helped him take revenge, and because Duque was now a true demigod of Azeroth. Even so, Malygos's words were still unacceptable to Duque. How could the world be so simple? This kind of black and white approach would only force all neutral parties to stand against one's own. Moreover, all models and regulations would only stifle the invention of all new magic. This was what Duque valued the most and could not accept. Duque pondered for a long time. Alexstrasza, can you help me make an appointment with Malygos? There are some things I want to make clear to him in person. The Red Dragon Queen shook her head regretfully. Sorry, that guy is stubborn and loves face. He used to look down on you. No, it should be said that he looked down on all existences other than the dragon aspect and Elune. Now that you are on equal footing with him, he can't accept it. In fact, even if you use magic to send him a message, he will refuse to answer. Duque was embarrassed. Malygos, why did you give up treatment? After complaining in his heart, Duque could only sigh. Well, then I suggest that we let Kalegos and Matagosa guard the sun well. As for the rest, when he calms down, you can slowly persuade him. Okay, thank you for your understanding. The Red Dragon Queen showed an apologetic expression. After ending the magic transmission, Duque's eyes and expression became cold. Malygos, don't be untactful. Since you are fated to die in history, if I try my best and you still insist on courting death, then don't blame me. Even if I pretend to be a good person, there is a limit. This time, Duque waited for 3 days, relying on the system elf to review the official documents while waiting for news from Malygos. It seemed that history had taken an unknown turn because Duque killed Nesario ahead of time. The news from the Temple of Sleeping Dragon was that the Blue Dragon King had finally decided to send Kalegos and Matagosa to supervise the restoration of the space around the Sunwell. Duque and Queen Sylvanas met the 2 blue dragons on the dilapidated Isle of Quel'Danas. Kalegos looked the same as before. He still had blue hair that Duque found very irritating, but at least Kalegos had used the ultimate transformation spell to give himself a pair of long pointed ears, and the exaggerated long eyebrows unique to elves. And his attire was no different from that of a standard noble mage of the Silver Moon Council. If it weren't for the fact that most elves lived long and basically knew all the former members of the Silver Moon Council, he might really have gotten away with it. As for Matagosa, she really had the appearance of a human woman. However, the robe she wore and the badge she wore belonged to the Marcus family. In theory, she was here on behalf of the Marcus family to monitor the Sunwell. This was quite interesting. Chapter 1544. Duque could only say that Matagosa's imagination was not small, and it was quite on point. To push Kalegos back, one had to become a human woman. There were not many human kingdoms or forces that the elves would not dislike, and the Marcus family was the best choice. Now the entire upper class of Cindorii knew that the 3 queens and sisters were Duque's property. Without Duque's support, Cindorii's livelihood would definitely be much worse than it was now. The Blood Elves had rather complicated feelings about Duque. On the one hand, they were grateful for Duque's strong support. On the other hand, they lamented that their most beautiful cabbage had been taken by a wild boar, and a demigod level one at that. Of course, the overall impression was still pretty good. With the endorsement of Duque and Queen Sylvanas, the elves quickly accepted Carrie, who had returned from learning magic from the Dalajan, and Maddie, the inspector of the Marcus family, as the new guard captains of the Well of the Sun, avoiding direct conflict with the Blue Dragon Legion. Duque secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Before this, Duque had secretly pulled almost 80% of the Alliance's air force into the Long Song Forest. Now that there was no need to fight, Duque was in a good mood. He glanced at Matagosa and then at Kalegos. Only the Blue Dragon sister could understand his actions. Matagosa did not avoid it and directly made a V gesture with his finger in a blind spot that Kalegos could not see. This was definitely not the meaning of victory. This gesture was similar to the guanyu that was often worshipped at the entrance of restaurants. A knife in one hand and 2 fingers in the other. The meaning was simple and straightforward. Cheating neither old nor young. I'll cut you down 2 tails for a pound. Mathagosa was telling Duque that he had successfully pushed Kalegos twice. Alas, the love of dragons was so simple and straightforward. All right. You win, coquettish dragon. Without the Blue Dragon Legion to stir up trouble, Duque could put his energy back into the alliance. The alliance's wartime economic model could not be immediately revoked. It was like a taut string. Once it was too loose, it could easily snap if it was tightened again. Duke only ordered the military industry to work in 3 shifts 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, with 2 shifts of 16 hours a day. There was no other way. Historically, when the Allied armies attacked Northrend, they relied on men and horses. The number of soldiers and civilians who froze to death and frostbite was astronomical. Letting the soldiers who were cold, tired, and lacking supplies fight against the tireless dead was no different from sending themselves to their deaths. Duque wanted to reduce the alliance's losses, and having Kudrin build a forward operating base was only the first step. More importantly, the alliance army changed. With the precedent of the millions of German troops attacking the Soviet Union in World War II on Earth, Duque, who knew the bitter cold of no scent, had made a lot of preparations. There were 1 million sets of military coats for humans, dwarves, gnomes, elves, Drenii, and even 30,000 sets for orcs. Then there were matches for the fire, as well as whale oil gels and industrial gels that had been cut into small pieces beforehand. Whale oil was easy to process, but the production was too low. Industrial gels were one of the byproducts of refining petroleum. Although it was a bit smelly, it was the best fuel in no scent. Since it could be burned, it was the best for the soldiers to cook on a picnic. Imagine marching for a whole day in a world of ice and snow dozens of degrees below zero. If they could only eat cold compressed biscuits and drink snow water that would freeze their stomachs, what a nightmare it would be. If there were fragrant hot soup and food, it would be extremely beneficial to physical recovery and morale boost. In addition, the writing of the winter code, the weaving of winter clothing, sleigh training, and all kinds of trivial things might seem unremarkable, but those who knew would know at a glance that it was because of the various preparations made before the war that the soldiers could play their due combat power on the front lines. The Alliance is really lucky to have a commander who doesn't treat soldiers as mere consumables. Every officer praised Duque in unison. Thinking about how Duque could be a god who didn't care about anyone, everyone's respect and love for Duque deepened. It was lucky to have a wise leader, such as the Horde. At least under Sal's leadership, more than 2 million orcs escaped from Draenor. However, a little bit of luck was not enough to bring a horde with millions of people on the road to happiness. After not having to face the outland that was gradually collapsing, food and other problems became increasingly prominent. What was even more unfortunate was that because the Dragon Sleep Temple had previously concentrated most of the energy of the planet's protection array to bombard Kill Jaden, many demons had been released. In fact, the number and quality of demons that had parachuted into the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor were about the same. However, the Alliance not only had a perfect magic communication system, as well as a patrol system in each village and town, but also a magic net that covered a large area. It was no exaggeration to say that if there was any movement in the Alliance, Duque, as the highest commander, would be the first to know. Orders were relayed from top to bottom, and elite troops were sent to eliminate the scattered demons in the bud. The Horde was different. The addition of 2 million people made places like the Barren Lands more populated. Unfortunately, orcs were not creatures that didn't eat or drink. They instinctively gathered in the few oases in the Barren Lands. Because of their living habits and the lack of planning by the upper echelons of the Horde, this led to the rapid consumption of water resources. At the same time, the concentration of population encouraged the spread of demons. Several times when the Horde discovered the problem, thousands of people had died, and several villages had been completely destroyed. The entire land of Kalimdor could be said to be full of beacons. So, having a transmigrator as a leader was not only luck, but also bliss. Unknowingly, the gap between the Horde and the Alliance did not shrink because of the influx of a large number of people. Instead, it became wider. After all, the horde had problems digesting the population, and the conflict between the new horde led by Sal and the traditional orcs from Draenor began to expand. Just as one side was recuperating, and the other side was in turmoil, it was autumn of the 25th year of the Dark Portal. On October 3rd, Sal suddenly received bad news. What? We lost contact with the entire Blackbone clan? There are even traces of corpses crawling out of the graveyard. The Blackbone clan was just an inconspicuous small clan among the thousands of orc clans of various sizes. But the death of an entire clan, and the possibility that they had become undead soldiers, touched Sal's sensitive nerves during this period. It wasn't that the Alliance didn't remind the Horde that the Scourge army could come again at any time. But Sal was almost broken by all kinds of internal affairs. After all, before the Scourge army came again, half of the Horde had to starve to death. Throughout the spring and summer, the Horde was struggling for survival. Chapter 1545. It was obvious that the tribe would have to pay for their carelessness. The current situation was like an endless loop. The tribe lacked food, and hunting alone was unable to meet the needs of the rapidly increasing orc population. The Alliance was not a charity. If you wanted food from the Alliance, you had to exchange it with ores. Traditional Draenor orcs also hated the act of engaging in productive work. Not only did they refuse to be miners, but the clans also refused to hand over their own hard work to the tribe. Since there was nothing to eat, the clans followed the tradition of robbing other clans. If the clans next to them did not have food, they would go to places with food like locusts. In the area controlled by the tribe in Kalimdor, the most fertile land was the grassy Thunder Cliff. Many starving orc clans ignored Thrall's ban and reached out to the Taran Kodo herd. In their eyes, this kind of huge beast was worthy of the tribe's warriors. Cairn Bloodhoof ran to Thrall to complain every 2 or 3 days. Thrall repeatedly forbade the orcs from attacking the Taran territory, but the poaching situation was still very serious. Not only poaching, but there were also private fights every day. Draenor orcs, ogres, and even Gruul's subordinates, Gallen, all came to Thundercliff to eat. This drove Cairn crazy, and he almost announced that the Taran would withdraw from the tribe. In the end, Thrall had to let Varrock Salyafar patrol the border of Thundercliff with the chief's personal guards. Those who were caught poaching were publicly executed, and the situation was barely suppressed. Unfortunately, Thundercliff was the shortest and most convenient passage to the desolate land. As long as the Taran stayed in the tribe, there was no reason to refuse the orcs to pass through their territory. It made the Taran watch every orc passing through the road like a thief. This further exacerbated the conflict within the tribe. Now seeing the report that the Scourge army was likely to sweep through Azeroth again, Thrall, who was inspecting the crossroads of the Barren Lands, felt deeply frustrated after reading the report. Was I wrong? I spent half a year, but I still couldn't let my people live a stable life. His eyes, which were always incomparably firm, began to have a confused look. Wajin did not know how to persuade Thrall, so he could only pat Thrall on the shoulder. No, Chief, you have done very well. No one in the tribe will do better than you. Actually, Sar was also bewitched. Even in Duke's celestial empire, it was not a simple thing to change from a nomadic people to a farming people, and it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Throughout history, the Han had assimilated many nomadic tribes, but it often required the efforts of several generations to constantly change their customs and provide better living conditions and job opportunities before the transformation could be completed. Originally, the best way to divert internal conflicts was war. Unfortunately, the Alliance would not give the Horde such a chance. The absolute difference in power was not only known to the orcs that Thrall had brought from the Eastern Kingdom. Even the orcs who migrated from Draenor knew about it. While the Alliance was transporting the orcs, under Duke's secret guidance, they did not hesitate to show off the Alliance's muscles. The disciplined soldiers, the earth-shattering cannons, the rumbling tanks, and the gigantic battleships. Even if the targets were scattered demons or crazy evil beastmen, it was enough to leave a deep impression on anyone who saw it. To be honest, Sal felt like it was a miracle. Almost every night when he lay down, He wondered if the alliance would turn around and destroy the horde without the oppression of foreign enemies. However, at this time, Sal could not think too much about it. He would never forget how he led the newly freed horde to fight the Scourge Legion in the southern Dalajan 10 years ago. Even if the horde now had a branch of the Forsaken who did not go too far could not be compared to the Scourge Legion who spread death wantonly. Alas! Sal sighed deeply. Wajin passed the order to gather the warriors of the Frostwolf clan and select warriors suitable for the cold weather from the tribe. We have no choice but to accept Duke's proposal for an expedition to Northrend. Who is going to lead the army? Wajin was not actually asking, but reminding Sal. Now that the atmosphere in the horde was so stiff, most of the other races were unwilling to go on an expedition. No one wanted to go out here and have their homes raided by their own people, especially the Tauren. The Alliance had put forward a requirement for cooperative warfare, and most of them were infantry. If the Tauren did not go, then only the orcs could fight in close combat. Sal's eyes were filled with sorrow. Just as he was a little hesitant, a young and majestic figure came into his sight. It was a burly young orc. Unlike the traditional Draenor orcs, he was more disciplined, and he also believed in the ideals of honor and firmness that his father believed in. And his character determined that he would be a brave warrior until the last moment. What do you think about letting Draenor go? Dranos Seraphar was Dranos Seraphar, also known as Little Seraphar. He was the young son of Varrock Seraphar and the nephew of the Horde's great hero, Brock Seraphar. Whether it was bloodline, status, or battle record, he was the leader of the younger generation. However, will the Alliance think that we are not good enough? Wajin cautiously reminded Sal. Sal smiled bitterly. Can I leave in this situation? Could Varrock walk away? Or are you going? The leaders of the Horde could not leave. Now the Horde was like a barrel of gunpowder, exploding at the slightest touch. If Sal was not here, the Horde would self-destruct without the Lich King's attack. Wajin, as the first advisor under Sal, was not only the leader of the trolls, but also the mediator. Many things that the chief could not come forward, he would come forward. Cain was nervous, so of course he would not go out. A Nastrian would not appear in front of the Alliance if he had a guilty conscience. As for Galavix of the Rustwater conglomerate, the ruthless and cunning prince of trade, would he be willing to go to the battlefield for the Horde? There was no other way, they could only pick the tall ones. Sal comforted himself and said to Wajin, the Alliance has many talented people, and the Horde must also cultivate their own talents. Otherwise, we will fall behind. Sometimes, we can only let go and let the younger generation go. In fact, Sal was also very young. He was now 25 years old. Unfortunately, Sal had started his career early. 10 years ago, he had already become the founder of a new tribe, and had become more senior. Woken could not refute what he said and cautiously said, Duke Marcus' personal integrity is still very good. At least he has never broken his promise, nor has he deliberately harmed the Horde. I can only hope that everything goes well. Sal sighed. Chapter 1546. On the Alliance's side, Duque, who was in his own study in Karazhan, felt his balls ache when he heard that Thrall was really going to send Salyafar over. Damn, was he really going to repeat the Gate of Heaven's Wrath? The answer was obvious. Only a moron would do such a thing. In history, it was the Stormwind City Regent, Duke Bolvar for Dragon, and Salyafar who led the Alliance and Horde armies to fight side by side against the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Then Lich King Arthas, who was supposed to be in charge of the Iceground Fortress, appeared. How could Salyafar, who had the word brave carved on his chest, be afraid when he suddenly saw the enemy boss? He just went for it. He wanted to hack Arthas to death with his axe. In the end, not only did the Japanese not succeed, but they were also taken advantage of. Second Fool used Frostmourne to cleanly cut down Salyafar Jr. just as the war was about to break out. The Allied forces fell into the Dreadlord Varimithas's trap. Master Potioneer Putre of the Royal Pharmacist Association of Undercity betrayed them. This old fox used a new plague to kill all the undead, Alliance, and Horde soldiers at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Duke Bolvar was on his last breath, and Lich King Arthas retreated with heavy injuries. The Red Dragon Queen, who rushed over after hearing the news, found that the poison was spreading quite seriously. If it wasn't suppressed, all of Northrend would become a world of death. After all, the Dragon Slumber Temple was also in Northrend. Alexstrasza directly ordered the Red Dragon Legion to set fire to the battlefield with a powerful and blazing dragon breath to suppress the spread of the plague. In the original battle at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, it could be said that the Calamity, the Alliance, the Horde, and even Sylvanas were the losers. It was like 4 people playing mahjong, and everyone had lost. In the end, the mahjong table was winning money. The situation in this life was very different from history. Duque couldn't afford to lose any of the Alliance's higher-ups, just for a little Salyafar, who only knew how to be reckless. Moreover, there were so many veterans of the Alliance who had changed their fates and survived. When would it be Bolvar's turn to fight? So far, Bolvar didn't have any notable achievements. He was just someone who looked after Varian's house. Duque couldn't bear to send young Salyafar off with William and his team. But won't a Nastrian cause trouble? Duque seemed to be muttering to himself. But there were 2 other beings in the room. Without a doubt. Definitely. The 2 voices spoke almost at the same time, and then they looked at each other. Queen Salolas took the initiative to lower her head and avoid eye contact, while Vashj, who was dressed in a white lace-made uniform, raised her chin slightly, seemingly a little proud. Duque rested his chin on his hand. He knew that Vashj was faking it. She used to be a palace maid. First, she fought secretly with other maids in the palace for 1,000 years. Then, she fought openly and covertly in the dark underwater world for 10,000 years. Her skill in palace fights was no less than that of the Eridar twins. If Duque hadn't secretly held back before Vashj became a Naga and inadvertently made himself her only beacon of hope, Duque wouldn't have the confidence to control such a powerful demigod with a fickle personality. Moreover, Duque didn't trust the Eridar twins. It was indeed more suitable for Vashj to suppress them. Salolas, I want you to keep an eye on the tribe's bones. Salolas immediately understood. I'll focus my attention on the guys other than a Nastrian. In a rare moment, Duke and Saloras looked at each other and smiled. It was good to have a smart subordinate. As a female demon who had personally come into contact with the Sun King, she could be said to have an extremely accurate grasp of the human heart. Since the Sun King wasn't willing to jump out immediately when Kil'jaeden descended and shout, "Welcome to the King's army," then he definitely wouldn't dare to personally make a move on such a small matter in no scent. Now he had a very advantageous position. Back then, he had persuaded a few dreadlords to rebel against the Lich King. Afterwards, these few dreadlords followed him into the tribe. According to him, these guys were just like the demon pets enslaved by the warlock. They were very obedient. This was *T. Even Duke did not dare to say that he could completely control the Eridar Gemini. How could a mere breaking dawn from the Anastrian district dare to say that he could control a few dreadlords that were at least at the beginner stage of the Void Lord rank? He was already on Kil'jaeden's side, so it was reasonable for him to collude with the dreadlords. If anything happened, at worst he would push the dreadlords out to take the blame. It didn't matter even if Sar didn't trust him. The tribe seriously lacked magic professions, and just relying on the tribe's second-rate warlocks wasn't enough. As long as he still had value, Sar wouldn't casually deal with him and his Forsaken subordinates. Letting Salolas monitor the Forsaken was like fighting poison with poison. The only thing that made Duque a little uncertain was Arthas' next move. Arthas, who had already become a Lich King, was extremely arrogant. Back then, Duque had slapped him in the face, once broke his hand, once chopped his waist, and even robbed Jaina. With Arthas' personality, he definitely wouldn't be able to take this lying down. Now, as expected, the plague that spread the scourge had come. However, in the face of Salola's methods, the few weaklings from the cursing sect quickly confessed how many times their former boss had been to the brothel. Moreover, the Alliance had recently implemented the strictest quarantine system. Any food that was over 100 kilograms had to be personally inspected by a cleric before it could be circulated in the market. Furthermore, it was inspected once a day. This move of the Scourge army had tricked the Horde, and the Alliance was unharmed. At the same time, the alliance also managed to gain a wave of reputation. When the Holy Knights publicly burned the cultists of the cursing sect, together with the food that had been corrupted by the plague, outside the main cities, the people's calls for battle reached its peak. This level of conspiracy was at most harassment. Originally in history, Naxxramas had once again visited the territories of the Alliance and the Horde, announcing the return of the Lich King with death and destruction. Now Naxxramas had nothing to do with the two idiots. Duque had put a lot of effort into the flying fortress, making this fortress no less inferior to Duque's own mage tower. Only an idiot would think of attacking Naxxramas by force. Otherwise, avoiding a flying fortress directly under the jurisdiction of a demigod would be the right thing to do. Of course, Duque couldn't take Naxxramas to the ice-ground fortress. Although Naxxramas was easy to use, it had a fatal flaw. It wasn't on any source of magic. Although the characteristics of the Titan creations allowed it to float in the air with only a small amount of energy. In order to maintain its floating state, it ultimately relied on the support of Duque's weave. The ice-ground fortress was located on the largest elemental passage between the Frost Elemental Realm and Azeroth. Who was strong and who was weak, it was clear at a glance. At this time, Vash swayed her waist, walked over, and gently massaged Duque's shoulders, reminding Duque, men always want face. Chapter 1547. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Vash's reminder was indeed useful. The Alliance's current territory was too large. If they wanted to bully the lower tribes, the Alliance's military strength was definitely enough. To defend against the Lich King, who stood at the top of the demigod level, the Alliance's current defense was not enough. If Arthas personally came to destroy their homes, not to mention small towns, except for the Dalajan who could attack and defend, most of the capital cities would not be able to do so. Excluding Duque's Karazhan, at most the Watchtower, as well as the Fearless Fortress and Naxxramas, which were under construction, could withstand it. Wherever Arthas appeared, the entire airspace would be dominated by frost elements. Unless Duque personally made a move, no one would be able to teleport over. Demigods were not easy to make a move. After killing Jaden with a big move, Elun had already spoken, telling Duque to take it easy. The great power used by the true gods of Azeroth and demigods was, after all, the energy of planet Azeroth. If it was overused, it would hurt the vitality of planet Azeroth. The last time he killed Cthulhu, the planet's vitality had already been greatly damaged. It was in the recovery period, and could not afford to make any more trouble. Damn. Duque could not make a move casually, and conversely, Arthas did not dare to leave Northrend casually. Without the geographical bonus of that icy and snowy continent, would Arthas dare to fight him, Duque, when he had the geographical advantage? This was a big question mark. There were many strong people on the other side who could come out and cause trouble, but there were only a few who had the deterrent power of a nuclear strike. Vash's reminder was very good. Since it was impossible to predict the enemy's target, he would use the enemy's weakness and force the enemy to hit the designated target. Duque tilted his head and smiled at Vash. Vash understood at that moment, and bent down to move closer to Duque. Duque did not have any desire. He only caressed her smooth face and gently said, "Since I casually changed your fate back then, and you have chosen to follow me now, I swear I will let you live a good life." Vash smiled faintly and gently held Duque's hand, rubbing it. "Being able to serve Master is my greatest wish." She put her mind in the right place. She had arrived too late and missed the rise of Duque. If she couldn't enter a man's heart during his difficult times, then the weight of this woman in a man's heart would always be limited. This was a matter of timing. Once missed, there would be no more opportunities. The three Windrunner sisters, Tyrande, Jaina, Elucia and Kalia, these seven had an unshakable position in Duque's harem. Vash could only play the role that was most considerate, and could help Duque the most. Only then could she ensure her position. At the very least, she would be the number one person in the harem. At this point, she had more and more hope of success. Duque calmed his mind, and sent a magic message. Soon, the portal at the top of the Karazhan Tower opened, and Jaina's beautiful figure appeared. Before Jaina entered Duke's study, Vashj obediently performed a maid's salute and retreated. "Good day, madam." Vashj bowed to Jaina as she left. "Hello, Suleika." "Thank you, madam." Just the details of how they addressed each other was enough for the two to complete a friendly exchange. Jaina had not married Duque yet, so calling her Majesty or Lady Proudmoore would seem too distant. Calling her madam was a compliment to Jaina and an acknowledgement of her position in Duque's harem. Jaina called Vashj Suleika because she acknowledged her special position by Duque's side. The two brushed past each other. Jaina closed the door after entering the room and went straight to the point. "Is it about Arthis? Is she going to provoke him again? Will it succeed?" Jaina was very smart and immediately guessed the key point. Back in the Fellwood Forest, Jaina did not have any psychological burden after messing with Arthis once. It was just that she did not think that Arthis would kneel in the same place twice. Duque shook his head. "No, it was barely successful back then. Now that Arthis has merged with Nazul's will, it is even more impossible to succeed. He is calmer now." "Ah? Then what should we do?" Jaina very naturally walked around Duque's desk and sat on Duque's lap. Duque smiled and completed the posture of carrying her. "Doesn't Arthis never forget that he is the master of Lordaeron?" Jaina naturally understood. "Then I will visit Lordaeron?" Duque smirked and kissed Jaina. "I will go in private. We will go this far together. Lordaeron used to be the only pearl of the Alliance. After Arthis killed his father 15 years after the Dark Portal, Lordaeron once fell and became a city of death. After that, Anastrian occupied it for a short time and almost turned it into a city of darkness, which then became a tumor in the Alliance. Fortunately, when Lordaeron was on the verge of destruction, Duque first brought out Kalia Menethil, the legitimate heir. Later, he organized an army of the Alliance to drive away the Sun King, which led to the revival of Lordaeron. 10 years had passed. Almost the entire land of the eastern and western Plaguelands had now been decayed. Now, with the help of Tyrant and Malfurion, and the help of the Druids of the Cenarian Circle, the rotten soil was finally purified. Those that could not be purified were all taken to the Endless Sea and thrown into the Great Whirlpool. Kalia discussed with the ministers and renamed the eastern and western Plaguelands to the Eastern and Western Holy Light. This name was actually quite suitable for the current situation. After all, in the former Eastern Plaguelands, there was the holy city of Stratholme, which had changed history, and the Holy Light's Hope Chapel. In the Western Plaguelands, there was Uther's tomb in the south of Andoril, which had been destroyed by the Calamity Army. With the support of Duque and Kalia, Tyrion Fordring and Gavin Rad-Doom, the only two remaining 5 Silver Sages, had changed Andoril into the headquarters of the Silver Hand Knights. There were more than 10,000 knights stationed there for a long time. There was also a mechanized corps composed entirely of humans, with 600 tanks of various types and 30 flying battleships. There was also a Dalajan mages, as well as more than 1,000 paladins or paladin apprentices. It was precisely because they had suffered the greatest destruction and degradation that the people of Lordaeron had the strongest will of the Holy Light. In front of the teleportation portal of New Lordaeron City, the royal knights were lined up neatly, holding their shining swords high. They welcomed the visiting Queen Kurtiras with the most orderly military formation amidst the music. Sister Kalia, Sister Gianna, the two beautiful queens hugged each other warmly. Unlike the formal greetings between the heads of state, their special identities as members of Duque's harem made them really close like sisters. Even the most picky person would not be able to find any trace of hypocrisy when looking at them. The new nobles of Lordaeron looked at them with pure admiration on their faces. Chapter 1548. The queen was as beautiful as a painting. She aged quickly, and no matter how beautiful a woman's looks were, they would only last 10 years. These two, on the other hand, were immortal and youthful. Kalia's pure and exquisite face still retained a strong girlish aura. Her doll-like face and figure made her look like the most perfect work of art, to be looked at from afar but not to be desecrated. As the elemental aura around Jaina grew denser, apart from her natural intellectual beauty, there was now an additional layer of psychedelic color, making her look even more mysterious. Moreover, Their elegant temperament and noble status naturally made the hearts of the entire continent's bachelors fall in love with them. If a mortal could obtain the favor of one of them, or even just a single night at their bedside, it would be enough for them to brag about for a lifetime. Unfortunately, such women were destined not to be stolen by mortals. Their common man was Duke Marcus, the Alliance's great hero, supreme commander, and one of the few genuine demigods in Azeroth. Since it was impossible to possess, there was only praise and recognition. Perhaps a subject who caught the eye of Her Majesty the Queen would be granted eternal life. That was what they were aiming for. For example, Edwin Van Cleef had been a mere stonemason back in Stormwind. Once upon a time, the nobles of Stormwind and even the entire Alliance had looked down on this low-born thief and stonemason, saying that he was written as a marquis, but read as a country bumpkin. They even mocked him for wanting to marry his daughter off to a noble. As time went on, everyone changed their opinions. These days, there were more and more experts who could enter the realm of heroes. Gradually, there were various classifications of heroes. The lowest was the ordinary hero, and above that was the epic hero and the legendary hero. According to the latest classification, Edwin, as the father, was epic, while his daughter, Vanessa, was already a legendary hero. Marrying off his daughter to a noble was a mortal's idea. The truly amazing thing was to send his daughter to be a maid under Duque's command. It was true that the Marcus family's status had risen with Duke's advancement. Didn't they see that even the maids were leveling up? When Vanessa had been a maid for the Marcus family, she was just a girl with better skills. Later on, the one who wanted to be a maid was already a Radiant Moon great astromancer, Solarian. Recently, with Vash's allegiance, everyone suddenly discovered that only a demigod could become Marcus family's maid. Countless nobles beat their chests and stamped their feet in regret. Fortunately, be it the Rotterdam Kingdom or Stormwind, the nobles of the entire Alliance had basically been purged once or twice for various reasons. Some of the nobles who were able to survive until today were new nobles who rose to power after the first battle at the Dark Portal. The remaining nobles who came from the old era were mostly new nobles who had accepted the thinking of the new era. Everyone also understood that the era of relying on bloodline was over. Only by taking on more responsibilities and making more contributions could Azeroth continue to exist, and everyone live a better life. Moreover, under Duque's leadership, the Alliance became stronger and stronger. Everyone personally witnessed that. The Horde, which had been a serious threat to the survival of the Alliance, had been left far behind. The economic, livelihood, military, and other areas of the cake were getting bigger and bigger. Everyone was getting a bigger share, so there was nothing to be dissatisfied about. Hence, even though they were fighting for it, it was still generally in a positive atmosphere. During the meeting, Jaina felt the friendly gazes from the nobles. She teased, "Sister Kalia, it seems that your control over the country is quite good. I'm in trouble. I have to earn money all day and then build ships so that those guys don't complain. Don't tease me, you rich lady of Azeroth. Even I want to rob you of your private stash." Kalia hooked Jaina's little nose. Take it. What's mine is yours too." Jaina hooked Kalia's arm and teased her as they walked into the palace. On this day, the meeting between the two beautiful queens became the topic of conversation for all the citizens of Rotterdam, after they ate and drank. 25 years ago, the Rotterdam Kingdom gave people the feeling that it was still in extremely backward Middle Ages. With the large-scale promotion of magic communication, the beautiful scene of the Queen's meeting was almost simultaneously spread to the entire Rotterdam Kingdom and the Alliance. This was the foreign version of the news broadcast that Duque had single-handedly created. After entering the Rotterdam Kingdom, the two queens talked and laughed as they entered the bedroom. After Kalia asked the servants to leave, a portal opened in the bedroom that was supposed to be in a state of space shielding. Duque walked out of the portal with a smile. "You're here. You've been hiding in Karazhan lately and rarely come to see me." Kalia pouted and pouted. Although she said that, she leaned over and offered her red lips directly. "Aren't I here now?" Duque took the opportunity to taste the fragrant lips of this beautiful queen who always maintained a pure heart. Immediately after, Duque hugged Jaina and gave her a kiss. Favoring one and discriminating against the other was a big taboo in the harem. Kalia asked. Arthas, will his men come? Yes. Because he's Arthas. Duque's answer was more like a tongue twister. In fact, this was a judgment made based on Arthas's character. Arthas was not simply brainwashed and joined the Scourge army, and then became the Lich King. He was Nazul, who patiently tempted him step by step, pushing his soul into the abyss, and finally achieving the end of the fall. The advantage of this was that Arthas would not be like the other paladins who were forcibly turned into Death Knights. Once their control was slightly weakened, they would immediately rebel and turn their spears against the Scourge army. The disadvantage was also obvious. Arthas retained his previous memories, personality, and way of doing things. In a sense, after completely merging with Nazul's soul, it was to gain the advantages of both of them. For example, Arthas was more courageous than Nazul, and the merged Lich King was no longer a coward. Another example was that Arthas could obtain Nazul's mind full of shadow magic, and become a true dual practitioner of magic and martial arts. However, even with the integration of the advantages of both of them, such a Lich King could still not be said to be perfect. In the end, the two of them were born with too many flaws. In theory, if they merged with the soul of another strong person, the effect would be better. Unfortunately, souls were not things that could be merged just because they wanted to, and souls that were too weak had no value in merging. It took Arthas almost 10 years to perfectly merge with Nazul. No one knew what the result would be, and how long it would take to merge with another one. What's more, Duque would not give them this time. The fearless stronghold was being built in full swing. With the Alliance's hands free, if Arthas did not fight back, the shameless Duque did not mind building fortresses all the way to the entrance of the Ice Crown Fortress, and then having a fortress against a fortress. Well, with Naxxramas, a total of 2 fortresses against 1 Ice Crown Fortress. Chapter 1549. In a sense, this was a counterattack that Arthas had to make under the pressure of the general situation. It couldn't be helped. The general situation was in Duque's hands. If he didn't want to lose even his pants, Arthas had to take the risk. However, he retained his memory and part of his humanity, and Arthas' weakness was fully exploited by Duque. Arthas had always claimed that he was the king of Lordaeron, and the only legitimate ruler of the kingdom. But now, the one wearing the crown of Lordaeron was his most beloved sister. Tyrrhenas had never cared much about the siblings, and only kept making demands and criticizing him. Every night when he dreamed of his father, he still didn't think that killing his father was a mistake. Kalia was different. His mother died early, and as his sister, Kalia was the last harbor of his soul. If he had known that his sister was not dead, he might not have fallen. After all, in his heart, it was his father's greed for Alterax's land that led to Nethario, the Wing of Death, and his sister's death. But before he fell into a deep sleep, he knew that Kalia was not dead. 10 years had passed, and when he woke up he found out about a series of shocking things. Duque had not only taken care of his beloved childhood sweetheart, Jaina, but he had also clearly eaten his biological sister at the same time. The man who had stolen his woman had become his cheap brother-in-law in the blink of an eye, and he hadn't even been given a public status. This contradiction, anger, and entanglement. If Earthes were still a living person, she would probably be tormented to the point of insanity. This terrible situation had become a problem that he could never get rid of from his soul. To become a purer Lich King, he had to completely abandon his humanity. The cruel part of his soul that belonged to Nazul was driving him, and his reason told him that this meeting between the two queens was a trap. So what if it's a trap? Thousands of miles apart, the two men who could stir up a storm in this era said the same thing. The only difference was that Arthas was sitting on an ice throne made of frost elements, while Duque was lying on the soft velvet bed, looking at Kalia, who was wearing white silk, and Jaina, who was wearing black silk, intertwined with each other as they slept. That night, dark clouds covered the sky, and there was no moon in the sky. The radiance of a lune did not reach the ground at all. In the pitch-black land of Rotterdam, even the brightest lighthouse looked like a firefly in the dark. Heaven and earth were covered by a hazy mist. In the sky, a large icebone dragon led a group of ice dragons, continuously flapping its wings that had long lost their membranes and were only left with a skeleton. They charged into the sky of the Rotterdam kingdom at high speed. These lifeless bone dragons relied on shadow magic to fly, not their wings. All the movements of flapping their wings were just a habit left over from when they were alive. Everyone attack. We have to kill our way in before the magic defense system of Lordaeron City is activated. We have to punish those who refuse to accept the honor of the Lich King's death. Announced the return of the Scourge army with the bloodiest massacre. The one leading them was the former Blue Dragon Queen, Sindagosa. 15 years ago, she had been resurrected by Nazul and saved Arthas. Ever since then, she had been the most loyal guard of the Iceground Fortress. Tonight, as the most powerful assault force under Arthas, she led the Ice Dragons, who had also been resurrected by the Lich King, to carry out a surprise attack in the night. Don't worry. As long as we suppress our elemental waves, those puny humans won't be able to find us before we enter their visual range. Sindagosa announced to her subordinates. The night was the best cover, to begin with. Coupled with the fact that it was a dark night filled with dark clouds, the ice dragons shuttled through the thick layers of clouds, adjusting their course purely by sensing the aura of the living. She did not believe that the slow and low-flying griffins or hippogriffs could detect the ice dragon army thousands of meters in the sky. In theory, that was true. Be it Sindagosa or Arthas, with their outdated knowledge, they could not imagine the drastic changes of the times. In the city of Rotterdam, not many people noticed that in the barracks in the four directions of the city, there were a few huge metal pans that kept spinning. Even more so, no one realized that this thing would bring about epochal changes. Theon watched as a bunch of low-ranked mages fiddled with magic equipment that he did not recognize, and then reported sets of data that he did not understand at all. He sighed deeply. Times have changed. Not far behind him, Duque stood with his hands behind his back and smiled. Indeed, times had changed. After experimenting with the sonar system in the Outer Realms, radar was naturally placed on the Alliance's research agenda. Duque wanted to push forward with this project as soon as possible, but unfortunately, no matter how many ideas he threw out, the gnomes and dwarven scientists were also working hard to help him realize all kinds of inventions that were like black technology to this world. The industrial base of this world still restricted the development of all kinds of new technologies. For example, radar. Although the Alliance already had diesel engines, they were pure machinery. Electrification, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. Duque had used the rotating electromagnetic coils to create a generator for the Alliance, but there was still a long way to go before he could create a stable electronic radar. Fortunately, in addition to technology, there was also magic in this world. Duque could link the weave and make each node of the weave emit weak elemental waves at a fixed time and frequency. The Ice Dragon army, who did not know, thought it was natural elemental waves. In fact, the missing and feedback of each elemental wave had been collected by the elemental radar at each node. After a long period of training, these earth mages, who had been unable to advance further in the field of magic, found a new life value in this special field. Elemental reactions confirmed. For the time being, there are 114 confirmed reactions. Direction 5 degrees west-northwest, speed 71 kilometers per hour, and still accelerating. Griffin Brigade of the 1st Air Force of Rotterdam. Asking if they want to intercept it? In the newly established Air Force Command of Rotterdam, it was a scene of bustle. The noise made traditional knights like Tyrion and Gavinrad confused. Finding the enemy through radar and commanding the Air Force was a headache even for Kudrin Wildhammer, the #1 person in the Alliance's Air Force. Yet Duque the Transmigrator did it well. Faced with the inquiries of his subordinates, Duque shook his head. Griffin Brigade, don't go. It's a pointless waste of combat power. Order the Brothel Brigade to get into formation and fire according to the shooting elements I provided. Listen to my command and fire in sequence. 3, 2, 1. Launch the flare. The Ice Dragon army, who had been traveling at high speed through the dark clouds, suddenly saw their eyes light up as a violent shock wave spread through the clouds above their heads. The next moment it was as bright as day above them. That's impossible. Sindagosa was shocked. The sun seemed to be very strong tonight. Chapter 1550. Almost at the same time, Kalia, who was sleeping soundly in the palace of the Rotterdam kingdom, suddenly raised her long eyelashes, and her sapphire-like eyes lit up. Just as Kalia was about to move, she suddenly realized that Jaina was hugging her even tighter. Jaina whispered into Kalia's ear, "Sister Kalia, you're not being good. Leave everything to Duque." Kalia understood everything at once. She was a little confused, but soon blushed with happiness. So, Duque has already arranged everything. He's such a gentle person. As the queen of the Rotterdam kingdom, she naturally had the responsibility of guarding the land. Duque took over the defense, and deliberately tortured her in the first half of the night to exhaust her physical strength. He didn't want her to know that her beloved brother had sent powerful subordinates to kill her, and destroy the kingdom that had been passed down for 2,800 years. Unfortunately, with the improvement of Kalia's strength, she was already infinitely close to the level of an archbishop. Not only did her physique improve a lot, but she was also extremely sensitive to elemental fluctuations. Not to mention the overwhelming explosion of frost elemental spells. However, tonight, Kalia was willing to be Duque's woman again, and not the queen of a kingdom. She entered a sweet dream, and what appeared in the beautiful dream was the beautiful rose of ice and fire that Duque had given her when she first met him. It was an otherworldly beauty. There was actually quite a commotion 10 kilometers away from the Rotterdam kingdom. With the accurate shooting of the flares, all the ice dragons appeared in front of the various monitoring stations, and the lookouts with binoculars kept reporting the location of the ice dragons. Then the battleships of the royal brothel launched a fierce bombardment. It was a terrifying rain of cannons that spanned nearly 10,000 meters. The cannonballs pierced through the sky, and countless arcs of light with terrifying power were drawn in the night sky. Although the ice dragons were essentially undead, and their resistance to physical damage was quite high, the Calamity Army, who was uninformed, did not know that the Alliance had long installed a large number of blessings of holy light cannonballs. The cannonballs that exploded not only had physical damage, but also had the dual attributes of fire elemental and holy light. Ice Dragon's ice shield was easily broken like a soap bubble. In just one face-to-face encounter, more than 30 bone dragons had unfortunately been directly hit by multiple cannonballs. The destructive power was so terrifying that it was beyond Sindagosa's imagination. It blew up the bone dragon with its incomparably tough bones in one go. The sturdy bones that even the orc's axes couldn't even leave a white mark on them were smashed into pieces like rotten wood. The bone fragments that emitted a large amount of frost elements bloomed in the sky of the Rotterdam kingdom like snowflakes that were blown away by the wind. Impossible! Sindagosa exclaimed. Disperse! Spread out! The ice dragons in the sky had completely lost their formation. They tried to control the elements around them that had become chaotic, and maintain their flying state. Some of them fluttered their wings and flew up, some turned around rapidly, and some dove down. With all kinds of dodging movements, the second wave of shells only caused limited damage. About 7 ice dragons were destroyed, and the rest were mostly lightly injured. Idiot! Do you think this is the end? With a cold announcement, Sindagosa suddenly realized that a night elf in a pure white priest's robe had raised her hands high in the sky to the east. Holy and holy radiance blossomed from her body. The divine might of the moon goddess Elun also descended in the next second. It was another meteor-like object that fell from the sky, but this time, it was not cannonballs, but meteorites from the void battlefield. Under the guidance of High Priest Tyrant of the Shrine of the Moon, and the restraint of the divine power of the moon goddess, meteorites of various sizes broke through the atmosphere, and hit the ice dragons with terrifying kinetic energy. The humorous WIRMs, whose bodies were extremely tough, were hit by the terrifying meteor fall. They immediately exploded like building blocks that had been kicked apart. No, Sindagosa let out an angry howl of the soul. Ice dragons were not ordinary WIRMs. They were all blue dragons that had been killed on the spot when Nesario betrayed the Dragon Sleep Shrine. Only dead blue dragons could become ice dragons. Hence, Every time an ice dragon was destroyed, there would be one less ice dragon. There were not many adult blue dragons left in the Blue Dragon Legion. How could there be so many ice dragons to replenish? Sindagosa was infuriated. She screamed, urging the strongest of the ice dragons to attack Tyrant with her. You want to hurt Sister Tyrant? You have to get past me first. Sylvanas appeared, riding Varistaz, the once extremely powerful red dragon. The power of the artifact, Wrath of the Stars, was maximized in her hands. If the cannonballs and meteor fall could still be seen, Queen Sylvanas's divine arrows were so fast that it was almost impossible to see them with the naked eye. The souls of the ice dragons trembled. They instinctively wanted to dodge the divine arrows that represented destruction and destruction. Unfortunately, dodging was too difficult for the ice dragons with their huge bodies. When they were alive, they still had hard scales, tough dragon skin, and muscles to protect them. Now once their bodies were destroyed, it would be their doomsday. Once their souls, filled with hatred and anger, lost their corpses, all that awaited them was complete dissipation. Sindagosa was furious. She opened her hideous mouth wide, making the fangs in her mouth even sharper. You're just a crippled ancient dragon. Yes, she was dead. So dead that only her bones remained. But as an ancient dragon personally resurrected by the Lich King, she had more ice elemental circuits carved into her body than any other ice dragon. Perhaps her melee abilities were not as good as when she was alive, but her control over the elements was better than before. In front of her, Valistaz was really not enough. Unexpectedly, Queen Sylvanas laughed. I'm only responsible for stopping others from getting close to Sister Tyrant. Sindagosa, your opponent, is her. Queen Sylvanas pointed her right index finger at the sky. Roar! A domineering dragon roar rang out. A huge creature was descending from the void above the atmosphere at high speed. It swooped down with its huge wings, which were like black clouds in the sky. Every time it flapped its wings, the clouds that were stirred up were reminiscent of a terrifying storm. Like a meteor, it flew diagonally through the atmosphere. The crimson color on its wings told everyone that it was terrifyingly hot. There was no need to spit out dragon breath. The air turbulence caused by the flapping of its wings was already filled with crimson sparks that flew everywhere. At a glance in the dark, one would think that it was the Red Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza, the giver of life. However, the blackness that seemed to come from the deepest and farthest abyss told others that she was the current Earth aspect dragon, Onyxia. Chapter 1551. Oh. Is the food in the void that good? I think you've gotten fatter. Duque's magical message was sent directly into Onyxia's ears. Bastard master, this is the power of that damn dragon aspect. I don't like it at all. Onyxia began to complain on the spot. Good. Thank you for your hard work. Finish it quickly. Despite her complaints, Onyxia was becoming more and more self-righteous. Looking at Sindagosa, Onyxia suddenly felt like she was in a trance. Thinking back to the fate that Duque had shown her, she subconsciously compared the tragic fate that she should have suffered to this blue dragon queen, who was filled with tragedy. If I continue to walk the path of evil, perhaps this will be my fate? She was not a kind dragon to begin with, and her so-called sigh only lasted for a second. When she became serious, her black vertical pupils, which were wrapped in golden yellow, only had a coldness that seemed to belong to the ruler of all living things. As the mount of the god of fate, she looked down at yet another pitiful creature that had fallen into the trap of fate. Sindagosa, since that bastard Maligos isn't willing to come, then let me do it for him, and end everything. Don't mention that filthy name. Sindagosa let out a shrill dragon roar and pounced forward. His wings, which were devoid of beauty and only had bone spikes, spread out, and even the surrounding air trembled slightly. After explosively spraying out frost elements, Sindagosa's huge body shot into the sky like an arrow, heading straight for Onyxia. The world of frost elements was connected to the real world through the evil magic runes on her body. For a moment, it was as if two different spaces had overlapped. You're already dead, so don't wander around. Do you know? You're an eyesore. Onyxia was furious as well. She flapped her huge black wings, and the wind pressure created a terrifying storm in the air. Even from a few hundred meters away, Tyrant's hippogriphon was still blown around. She had no choice but to pull on the reins and have the hippogriphon retreat further. The sky was the domain of the birds of prey and dragons. Any existence that attempted to defeat dragons in close combat would have to pay a terrible price. It wasn't just Tyrant. Even Queen Sindagosa retreated. One life, one death. One white, the other black. One was ice, the other was fire. The two dragons collided with each other in mid-air. At that moment, the pitch-black sky was filled with the purest elemental radiance. Half of the night sky was densely covered with fiery red flame patterns that carried a holy aura, while the other half of the night sky was filled with layers of overlapping snow-white frost elemental runes. Two utterly different scenes separated the entire sky. At the beginning, it was just a small region of elements colliding with each other. Soon, as a large number of elements were drawn in from the elements realm, they constantly collided with each other. The overflowing ice and fire elements began to spread in all directions. With the two dragons fighting fiercely as the center, it was as if time had stopped for a moment, and then a huge shockwave like a mushroom cloud spread out. The shockwave, thousands of meters high in the sky, even swept across the land that was plunged into darkness below, rolling up dead leaves and sand that filled the sky. In the command center, Theon asked Duque, "Can Onyxia win?" Duque rubbed his chin casually. Although she always lacks fighting spirit, she believes that when she stands on the winning side, she will always be the winner. To be honest, from the moment Sindagosa led his army into the skies of Lordaeron, Arthas' attack this time was destined to fail. Theon sighed. "That's why we admire you. You've always tried your best to decide the outcome of a war before the battle even starts. Those of us on the front lines, even if we know that we're just going through the motions, are willing to fight." Duque smiled bitterly. "You think too highly of me." Gavin Rad also came up and patted Duque on the shoulder. "Boss, don't be so humble. We're all thinking that if you can always be so brilliant, it wouldn't matter even if you lead the Alliance for 100 or 1,000 years." Duque's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how to describe this feeling. What did a great man say in the past? Absolute power leads to absolute corruption. Duque had always thought of himself as a layman. Even now that he had stepped into the divine realm, he still didn't feel like a true god. He had become a demigod more out of a desire for power. However, this desire was only based on the goal of defeating the Burning Legion. What would happen after defeating the Burning Legion? Perhaps Azeroth would already be very peaceful? Would he still have the drive and the sense of urgency he had now, and put all his thoughts on promoting the world forward? The answer was obviously no. Thinking of this, Duque smiled and shook his head. "No, my term as commander will only last until the Burning Legion is defeated. The day of the decisive battle between Azeroth and the Burning Legion that I saw in the River of Fate is not far from now." As he spoke, Duque raised his hands and put up 10 fingers. 10 years. 10 years at most. The Legion will launch a general attack on Azeroth. Whether the world can survive, and whether our children can have a future, depends on the next 10 years. Duque's words caused the surrounding people to be moved. Gavin Rad was the first to laugh. "It's just 10 years. I've been with you for 25 years since I was 20, boss. 10 more years won't make a difference. If I feel like I can't fight anymore, then please give me that. Anyway, when I'm 80, even if I don't die, I'll kill myself." Theon raised Ashbringer in his hand. "Alexandros passed it on to me, and I won't let him down. If I can't fight anymore, I'll be like him and pass on this divine artifact as a spark of hope." Duque smiled. "The 5 Silver Saints. It's not time to retire from the stage of history. For some reason, I have a hunch that Turayan and Sidon aren't dead yet. When we fight the Burning Legion, they'll definitely run out of nowhere, crying and begging to join us." Hearing this, Theon and Gavin Rad froze for a moment, and then smiled brightly. They weren't sure, but their intuition told them that Duque must have confirmed something from the River of Fate, and was using this obscure method to encourage them. While they were chatting, the outcome of the massive battle in midair had been decided. The result was not surprising at all. Bone dragons didn't have an advantage in hand-to-hand combat after losing their muscles and skin scales. The ice elemental magic circuit that the Lich King had given her wasn't her own after all. Sindagosa, who didn't have the upper hand in the elemental duel, was seized by Onyxia and struck her in the waist with her dragon tail. With the crisp sound of bones breaking, she screamed and fell from the air. Chapter 1552. Surprisingly, Onyxia didn't pursue him immediately. Instead, the Lordaeron Command Center received a magical message from her. Bombard Sindagosa. The coordinates are... After Onyxia reported the coordinates in one breath, the female mage in charge of magical communication was stunned for a full 2 seconds and couldn't react. What? Didn't you hear? Did the magical communication get disrupted? Only then did the female mage come to her senses and repeat the coordinates, which were quickly conveyed to the Royal Brothel Regiment. The female mage was not to be blamed. After all, in everyone's impression, the dragons were the most conservative and stubborn. They could hold on to the orders left behind by the Titans and guard Azeroth for a full 25,000 years without changing. Naturally, the others would not have thought that Onyxia could play with cannons so smoothly. Pfft, what's there to be surprised about? It's not like we're fighting for time. I have to take the risk of having my beautiful scales scraped off to deal with an ugly bone dragon? I won't do it. The Black Dragon Princess's words could be said to be willful and cold. Even Duque's facial muscles stiffened when he heard it. He then smiled bitterly. That was good. He could try to see how effective modern cannons were against powerful creatures of the second highest tier. Onyxia's dragon tail sweep had an impact force of at least 10 tons. Even if it hit the walls of Lordaeron, it probably wouldn't be able to take more than 2 hits. Sindagosa's strength lay in her spellcasting ability, not her hand-to-hand combat ability. When there was such a being that could ignore her various frost attribute attacks, she was nothing much. In that regard, Onyxia, who was already a dragon aspect, was her absolute nemesis. The Black Dragon was a fire elemental, unlike her big brother, who used the Shadow Flame attribute. After going through a special dragon ritual in the Wyrmrest Shrine, and being a dragon aspect, her fire abilities became stronger. Sindagosa's Frost Tomb, Frost Halo, and other skills could torture the Alliance's hero squad to death, but they couldn't hurt Onyxia. This was a battle of pure elemental abilities. When magic couldn't decide the outcome, melee combat would be the key to victory. How could a sluggish former demigod-tier dragon defeat a living guardian dragon? Wasn't the answer obvious? Sindagosa struggled to climb out of the crater she had made in the ground. Onyxia's attack was indeed a heavy blow, but it wasn't enough to completely destroy her. As soon as she climbed up, she stretched her neck towards the sky and let out an angry roar. Then, she spoke in draconic language. When translated, it basically meant, "Little girl, you're not qualified to teach me a lesson." Onyxia's reply was a very anthropomorphic smiley face. It was hard to imagine how a dragon with such a terrifying face could make an expression similar to hee-hee. She did it and even expressed the meaning of "you have a lot of ideas." The next moment, Sindagosa knew what his opponent meant. Whoosh! The familiar ear-piercing whistling of the wind could be heard. Before she could do anything, hundreds of tons of artillery shells rained down on her head. When she was at her peak, these artillery shells wouldn't be a problem at all. The so-called artillery shells had to hit the target and trigger the firing pin and fuse in the shell to explode. Previously, Sindagosa had used her unparalleled icy aura to freeze all the artillery shells within a 500-meter radius around her. The firing pin was frozen, and the explosives connected to the fuse could no longer explode. All the artillery shells turned into metal lumps and fell straight to the ground. But now, the intense clash between the ice and fire elemental domains had consumed almost all of her magic power. Furthermore, much of the magic circuits on her body had been destroyed by Onyxia in melee combat. She was now a pure bone dragon, and a half-crippled one at that. This time the air fleet, which had been stifled for so long, finally struck gold. The artillery shells rained down on the area where Sindagosa was, and in an instant, the barren hillside was shaved off by 1 or 2 meters. That's enough. After Onyxia's transmission, the fleet ceased fire in satisfaction. Onyxia dove down, and with the acceleration from free fall and her own acceleration, she reached an extreme speed of over 200 kilometers per hour. The tremendous kinetic energy fell on the struggling Syndagosa, and the first blow broke the already fragile dragon's spine in two. Not giving her opponent any chance, Onyxia flung Syndagosa's severed lower body away with her tail. Her 4 dragon claws latched onto her opponent's bony wings, shoulder blades, and neck. Her dragon mouth accurately bit down on the neck below the bone dragon's skull, and with all her might, she tore at it. Aha! Syndagosa's soulfire let out the most tragic wail. Then, her huge dragon skull was bitten off. Bah! Onyxia spat out the dragon skull, and used her claws to pry open the remaining ribs of Syndagosa's upper body. At almost zero distance, she used her ultimate move against the dark blue soulfire on the bone dragon's chest. Onyxia took a deep breath. It was a classic move that made countless players' scalps go numb. Deep breath. The scorching heat melted the nearby sand into a translucent glass-like substance. Not to mention Syndagosa, who bore the brunt of the attack. After adding another dragon breath to the soulfire on Syndagosa's skull, Onyxia grabbed the skull with her claws and flew unhurriedly towards the command center in Lordaeron. Under the focus of the magic searchlights, Onyxia, who was larger than before, slowly flapped her wings and descended. She casually threw Syndagosa's skull into an empty space, and under the gaze of thousands of Alliance soldiers, she once again became Countess Katrana. The Alliance recruits who hadn't seen this scene let out cries of surprise. If it were the Black Dragon Princess of the past, she would definitely be pissed. But now, she pretended not to hear it. Gently holding the hem of her red dress with both hands, Onyxia came before Duque and the higher-ups of the Alliance. She knelt on one knee and said in a clear voice, "My beloved lord, your mount, the Earth Aspect Dragon Onyxia, has completed the mission you assigned and successfully killed the fallen Blue Dragon Queen, Syndagosa. She has returned to report." Her words caused a commotion among the surrounding Alliance soldiers. What was cool? This was what it meant to be cool. Queen Sindorii next door had an ancient red dragon mount, and those elves were so arrogant. Compared to them, we humans are the truly awesome ones. Just look at Commander Duke Marcus. He stepped into the divine realm as a mortal, and even used a Earth Aspect Dragon as a mount. Faced with the cheers of 666 from the onlookers, Duque also felt proud. He smiled and said, "You will be rewarded, but we'll talk about it later." Onyxia, who had been serious just a moment ago, suddenly blushed. Chapter 1553. The pure people of Azeroth certainly couldn't understand the breadth and depth of Chinese culture. They hadn't been told about the pun, so they couldn't understand it even if they thought about it for the rest of their lives. Onyxia wasn't keen on exploring dragon caves, but she liked the feeling of relying on strategy to make the other party fall into a trap and win in the end. It was a kind of pleasure that the other party couldn't defy fate no matter how hard they struggled or resisted, and would eventually be destroyed. Standing on the side of the victor, standing under the banner of the god of fate, compared to this, it wasn't so unacceptable to suffer and become a mount for a while. Besides, after Duque stepped into the divine realm, she didn't lose face, and no other four-colored dragons would make things difficult for her because she became Duque's mount. It was a bit annoying to be forced to work when something happened, but when she had nothing to do, she could sleep on a dragon bed full of gold, and her days were quite comfortable. Onyxia, who had nothing to complain about, stood proudly beside Duque under the gaze of the Alliance soldiers. Duque nodded, and then opened a magic communication mirror with Alexstrasza. Onyxia just killed Syndagosa, who had degenerated into an ice dragon. It was only a short sentence, but it was exchanged for 10 seconds of silence from the Red Dragon Queen. After a long time she sighed. This matter shouldn't have been handled by the Dragon Slumber Temple. This time, it was Duque's turn to be silent. The Queen's silence was embarrassment, and Duque's was protest. "Please clean up the mess of the dragons yourselves." Alexstrasza didn't know what to say. At the end of the day, It was Malygos himself who wasn't kind. His wife had been seriously injured by Nesario, but he had run away in a lunatic. Well, she was dead, and she couldn't even return to the Dragonbone Waste where the dragons slept. She fell halfway, and her soul carried a deep resentment towards him. 10,000 years had passed. Even after killing Deathwing Nesario, and Duque repeatedly reminded him to pay attention to Syndagosa's remains and not be used by the Lich King, Malygos still didn't pick up his wife's 10,000-year-old bones because of his pride. Now his dead wife and his former minister had been picked up to be an ice dragon. Malygos still did not care, sticking his head in the sand like an ostrich to escape reality. Alexstrasza, of course, could feel Duque's anger. She felt very guilty towards this demigod of Azeroth, who had helped the Dragon Slumber Shrine a lot, and was now on equal footing with the Dragon Slumber Shrine. I will send my subordinates to collect the remains of Syndagosa and his men, and use a soul pacification spell to suppress them in the Dragonbone Waste. I will also inform Malygos in the end. Duque's eyes narrowed into a line. To be honest, he was very dissatisfied. No one knew better than him what Malygos was doing at this point in history. To be honest, there was no cure for brain damage. Duque opened his mouth and said coldly, "You also know that we are now preparing to suppress the Lich King Arthas and his Scourge Legion. Since he even dared to desecrate the remains of dragons, I think the Dragon Slumber Shrine should be on the same side as the Alliance and the Horde." "That's right." Alexstrasza nodded heavily. "Is there anything the Dragon Slumber Shrine can do? My Red Dragon Legion can be deployed soon." With Kil'jaeden's heavy losses, the Burning Legion fell into chaos. Without the orders of their commander, the Void Lords were busy fighting for power. Naturally, no demons would foolishly run to the Void battlefield outside of Azeroth's atmosphere to die. Apart from the Blue Dragon Legion, which only had a few dragons left, and the Black Dragon Legion, which only had Onyxia left. In fact, as the main force of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, the Red Dragon Legion, Green Dragon Legion, and Bronze Dragon Legion were idle. The Green Dragon Legion benefited from Duque's reminder, and Isra used Elun's power to prevent the fall of Laythorn, Amolis, Tyrell, and Isidri, the 4 powerful dragons. The Green Dragon Legion could be said to have been saved. The Bronze Dragon Legion was still relatively strong at this time, because they had the responsibility of guarding the timeline, and would not be transferred easily. It could be said that most of the dragons were bored to death. It was rare for Alexstrasza to take the initiative, so it would be a waste for Duque not to use her. However, Duque still had some concerns. "Thank you for the help of the Red Dragon Legion, but I still have a worry. I'm afraid that Malygos will be unreasonable, and say that I shouldn't have killed Syndagosa. You know, his brain is a bit." Duque's index finger shook his temple. The Queen was also having a hard time. On one side was a powerful ally like Duque, and on the other side was her own brother. She was caught in the middle, unable to do anything. Duque emphasized, "To be honest, I've always had deep doubts about whether Malygos is sane or not. In my opinion, any action that might destroy Azeroth is unacceptable. I've already given in regarding the Sunwell. Now is a critical moment in the upcoming war with the Scourge. If Malygos abandons his duty and attacks me, Onyxia, or the Alliance because of Syndagosa, I won't rule out the possibility of killing him myself. As soon as Duque finished speaking, both the Alliance and Onyxia, who was standing beside him, were in awe. What was responsibility? That was responsibility. Being able to beat up the enemy and protect his underlings. Only this kind of boss was truly worthy of dying for. Even though Alexstrasza had a headache, she knew Duque very well. She knew that Duque would not start a war over a small matter that could lead to civil strife. "What else do you know?" Duque waved his hand lightly, and Onyxia immediately walked over. "I found Tesario." "What? You mean Tesario? He hasn't appeared for 10,000 years. The Red Dragon Queen was shocked. "But I sensed him in the Obsidian Temple of the Dragon Slumber Temple. Not just him, there's no less than a large group of adult black dragons." The Black Dragon Princess seemed very certain. This time, Alexstrasza could not remain calm, because the Obsidian Temple was right below the Dragon Slumber Temple. In fact, the Black Dragon Princess had never been to the Obsidian Temple. The temple that should have belonged to the Black Dragon army had been sealed before she was born. Since Duque wanted her to say it, this cunning female Black Dragon did not need to prepare a draft when she lied. After all, this was a secret that her master, who was like the god of fate, knew. Among the countless secrets of the Dragon Slumber Temple, the temples of the various dragons had always been a secret existence that the dragon aspects avoided talking about. But not long ago, the Obsidian Temple had changed. It seemed that adult black dragons had returned here, and began to incubate dragon eggs and raise new young dragons. It was the twilight dragons that were considered taboo by the Dragon Slumber Temple. The one leading these black dragons was the powerful black dragon Cytherio, who had disappeared in the ancient war. Chapter 1554. The Dragon Sleep Temple knew nothing about this, but unfortunately, they couldn't hide it from a transmigrator like Duque. The queen's figure was trembling. "This is no small matter," the Black Dragon Princess said with certainty. "Why don't you take your men and come with me?" The queen was also very decisive. "Give me a day, I want to gather the Red Dragon army. Tomorrow at noon, I'll wait for you at the Dragon Sleep Temple." "Okay." After agreeing with Onyxia, the queen looked at Duque again. "The Dragon Sleep Temple owes you another favor. If Malygos really does something reckless without asking for a reason, the Dragon Sleep Temple will stand on the side of justice." The queen said this, which meant that if it really came to that, the dragons could only give up on Malygos. After all, they knew their brother's trap best. In these 10,000 years, hadn't the queen lamented Malygos countless times? In the past, Azeroth wasn't dangerous. If Malygos wanted to be crazy or autistic, it was up to him. Now he kept making mistakes. If it wasn't for him helping to guard the Void battlefield a while ago, Alexstrasza almost wanted to start a vote in the Dragon Sleep Temple to remove him from his position as the Blue Dragon King. Just now, Duque had been tough because he wanted her to see the big picture. Any existence that stood in the way of protecting Azeroth would be crushed to pieces. It wasn't that she hadn't heard the argument that Malygos should ban mortals from using magic and bring it under his jurisdiction. In fact, if she really did that, where would Duque, the demigod of the Weave, stand? The alliance led by Duque was already the core force against the Burning Legion and the fallen ancient gods. If the Dragon Sleep Temple still protected Malygos at this time, then it would be violating the duty that the Titans had left them. In the face of the big picture, Alexstrasza had to make a promise. Duque was very satisfied. Letting the Dragon Sleep Temple clean up first was actually clearing the mines in advance. This was like cutting off the enemy's claws and teeth in advance. This method of weakening the opponent step by step, and then dealing a fatal blow, just so happened to be what Onyxia valued and liked the most. Ending the magic communication, Duque felt Onyxia's scorching gaze. He turned slightly and met Onyxia's eyes. Interestingly, Duque felt that her gaze had become similar to Vashti's. It was a pleasant surprise that the Black Dragon girl, who used to be a little reluctant, would change like this. Ignoring her, Duque turned to Theon. "Tonight's mission has been accomplished. Cancel the red alert and lower the alert level to yellow." Theon nodded. "Understood." There was no need for Duque to make arrangements for small matters like defense. Although Gavin Rad suggested speeding up the construction of the Fearless Stronghold, Duque shook his head and refused. In the world of ice and snow, the Lich King's family wasn't the only one looking for trouble. After the internal troubles of the Dragon Slumber Shrine were eliminated, there were only 2 enemies left. To be precise, it was 1.5. At this time, another magical message came. It was from Queen Sylvanas. "Duque, a few half-crippled bone dragons escaped here. Tyrant and I have decided to train the aerial knight's pursuit ability. We won't go back tonight." Duke nodded. "All right, thank you for your hard work." Fighting against an overlord of the sky like ice dragons was a rare experience. And in a situation where they had the upper hand, training the troops like this would reduce their losses. It was impossible for Arthas to not have any ice dragons left. Training the troops now would greatly reduce losses when the time came. With a wave of his hand, Duque opened a portal and brought Onyxia back to the Lordaeron palace. Seeing the familiar light of the portal, the guards guarding the fixed portal still gripped their weapons dutifully. Seeing that it was Duque, they heaved a sigh of relief and saluted. Duque arrived at Kalia's palace unimpeded. As soon as the door opened, Kalia, who was wearing a nightgown, pounced on him and gave Duque a pecking kiss. "I heard." "Thank you, Duque," Kalia said excitedly. Beside her was Gianna, who was smiling. Seeing the black dragon princess beside her, Kalia let go of Duque and grabbed her hand. "Thank you too, Onyxia." The black dragon princess was clearly not used to such intimate contact. She looked like she wanted to pull her hand back, but did not dare to. After a while she could only bite the bullet and say, "This is Master's order." Her face was full of an, "I didn't do it willingly" expression. "But it is still a fact that you helped defend Lordaeron." Kalia held the black dragon's hand and leaned her head closer. The black dragon was not used to the burning light in her eyes. Most dragons were aloof. After Onyxia was born by her mother, she did not have any family warmth to speak of. Sinestra had been merciful enough not to kill the two siblings back then. After growing up, even her eldest brother, Nefarian, was in a relationship of mutual benefit. When had she ever experienced such intimate gratitude? It wasn't until this moment that Onyxia realized that she had social phobia in her bones. Not to mention the nobles of Stormwind that she played with back then. They were just pawns. When she really put the other party in the same position as her, she was suddenly at a loss. Just as she was about to retreat, Duque had already blocked her path of retreat without her noticing. Duque smirked. He suddenly realized that the clumsy black dragon princess actually had a cute side. "It's very simple, Onyxia. Just say no need to thank me, this is what I should do." "That's very likable. What's the point of being stubborn now? What was originally cute will become not cute at all." "Cute." Onyxia felt as if a certain soft part of her heart had been struck by lightning. Her whole body trembled, but she could not tell why. "Cute? Can someone like me be cute?" she muttered to herself in a daze. Even before she came out of her shell, she felt that she had always been associated with words like terror, ferociousness, destruction, and destruction. Even her own mother would only look at her with a mixture of fear and horror. As she grew up, she began to enslave many monsters, dragon men, and a bunch of random creatures. Every existence looked at her with the same gaze. She used to feel uncomfortable, but after she got used to it, she told herself that she should be happy. Gradually, her heart became twisted. Unexpectedly, after being treated as spineless and depraved submission, after being a mount for so long, she discovered another kind of feeling. Strangely, she found that her heart instinctively desired this kind of feeling. "Cute me." "Yes, you are very cute now." Duque was amused. He suddenly realized that when he poked the black dragon princess waist with his finger, she actually made a sound similar to a cat's meow. It was so charming. Chapter 1555. After a night of dragon taming, Duque was starting to doubt his life. Onyxia's taming last night made him think that he was dealing with Kalia, and not the once cunning and sinister evil female black dragon. But this was good, as it saved him the trouble of keeping a close eye on her. Having two female Eridar demons under him was enough of a headache. Playing this kind of game of mutual deception would be tiring. Of course, he had to be rewarded. When Onyxia woke up, Duque told her a secret. "Have you heard of Archefon's treasury?" Of course, Onyxia had never heard of this thing before, but that didn't stop her from hearing the most important word, treasure vault. Treasures were the love of greedy she-dragons. "What? Tell me." Countess Katrana, who used to exude a seductive aura, was now a greasy little fairy. "The treasury is at Wintergrasp Lake. There is indeed a lot of good equipment there, but you won't want them." "Why?" she asked, even though she knew that Duque was trying to bait her. "Because the key to the treasury lies in the few guardians." Wintergrasp Lake, where the treasury was located, was the largest lake in Northrend. With its unique strategic location and rich elemental materials, it naturally became a place that the Alliance and the Horde fought over. Now that the Horde's army had not set off, and young Salyafar was still gathering his subordinates in the barren lands, Arcophon's treasury naturally had nothing to do with the Horde. The location of the treasury was rather sensitive. From the map of Azeroth, the shape of Northrend in the north was a bit like a big kidney. The west and east sides were closer to the central maelstrom, while the Dragonbone Waste in the middle of the Wyrmrest Temple was sunken into the north. Although there were traces of the Scourge army throughout Northrend, strictly speaking, the southern region was not under their control. The Scourge army's absolute control was actually the Iceground Glacier in the northwest of Northwind. On the map, Wintergrasp Lake was located at the midpoint between the Alliance's new Fearless Fortress in the Northwind Tundra region and Arthas Iceground Fortress. It was only a mountain away from the Second Fool's Nest. It could be said that the treasury was quite close to the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, which could reach Arthas' lair, the Iceground Fortress. However, it was not within the Doomsday Army's absolute control. As an ancient Titan building, the treasures inside could not be underestimated. The Guardians were the Rock Guardian Archavon, the Storm Guardian Emeron, the Flame Guardian Kolalon, and the Ice Guardian Turawan. The 4 demigod guardians were typical elemental giants. Duque didn't know if they had divinity in them. Even if they didn't, the incomparably pure power of the 4 elements in them was a great supplement for Duque and Onyxia. After becoming a demigod of the Weave continuously absorbed the spiritual force of its user. It also used the excess spiritual force to connect to the 4 major elemental realms, extracting the wandering elements and filtering them before sending them to the spellcaster for use. In the process, Duque had refined many high-purity elements. However, the higher the purity, the harder it was to refine, and a battle between gods required extremely high-purity elements to hurt the other party. In the battle with Kil'jaeden, Duque had experienced this deeply. If he had been the main attacker in the battle at the Well of the Sun, who knew how long it would take to grind the eggs to death? After explaining the characteristics of the treasury to Onyxia, Duque concluded, Arcophon's treasury is both an opportunity and a trap for Arthas. I understand. It's a good opportunity. It was easy to talk to a clever dragon. If they waited until the Fearless Fortress was built before going to Arcophon's treasury, it would become a push, and Arthas would definitely not consider attacking casually. On the other hand, if Duque went to the treasury now, whether Arthas came out or not, the Alliance would benefit. If he came out, Duque, who now had the air advantage, would definitely not mind letting Elune throw a bunch of meteorites at him to teach the fool a lesson. If he didn't come out, because Duque was wandering in front, the Scourge would definitely not dare to pass by Duque and attack the Fearless Fortress directly. This would also buy time for the Fearless Fortress to be built. This was where Duque's strategy was ruthless. First knock out the Scourge's strongest air force, then step by step cut off the Scourge's space of activity and cut off their wings. This kind of strategy could be said to be steady and imposing, and it was used by the Alliance, so it was not easy to make mistakes. In the morning, after washing up, Duque took the Black Dragon Princess and Jaina, and opened the portal to Naxxramas. In the command post of this flying fortress, Duque held a video conference with the Alliance leaders. Magni Bronzebeard was the first to ask, "What? You said you want to attack Arcophon's treasury? I have no problem with this. But Duque, do you mean we are going to attack in Jasa, the Gate of Heaven's Wrath?" Duque raised his hand, and a general 3D map of the Iceground Glacier appeared in front of the kings. It had to be said that Nazul and Earthes had chosen a good place for their nest. The terrain of the Iceground Glacier was very high, located in the northwest of Northrend, with an average altitude of more than 1,000 meters. The whole area looked like a omega on the map, or it could be said to be shaped like a horseshoe. Duque explained, there are only 2 ways to reach the Iceground Fortress where the Lich King Earthes is located. One is to attack the Gate of Heaven's Wrath in the southwest side of the mountain, and after that, the Iceground Fortress is right above the gate. The second is to obediently follow the Lich King's line of defense from the southeast all the way to the north side of the canyon, braving the firepower from the top of the canyon, then circle back from the north to the Court of Bones in the southwest, and finally kill their way to the Iceground Fortress. This choice would make any commander with a little common sense frown. This kind of detour was simply sending food to the Scourge army. Not to mention the firepower from the top of the canyon. Just the people who died in the canyon and were resurrected on the spot were enough to make the attackers suffer. More and more enemies would appear every minute. Can't we attack from the air? Kudrin frowned deeply. My men are already used to flying in cold weather. Give us some time. Duque shook his head. Impossible. Duque casually waved his finger, and on the 3D map, the plateau basin where the ice-ground glacier was located was suddenly enveloped by a mournful howl of a blizzard. Duque sternly said, "This time, Earthes clearly has the geographical advantage. I have tried many times, but I can't extend the magic net to the ice-ground glacier and the storm cliffs in the east. That is Earthes' absolute home ground, and he can summon a large number of frost elementals in that area at will, destroying all the aerial knights and flying fleets that approach." Chapter 1556. This was going to be hard to deal with. At that moment, all the leaders of the Alliance frowned. Not being able to use their air force was tantamount to wiping out the Alliance's current technological advantage. If they were to return to the most primitive land warfare, how many lives would they have to sacrifice to break through the ice-ground fortress? No. It would be fine if they could calculate the total number of lives lost, but they were afraid that the Scourge army would become stronger and stronger, and the number of undyings would increase. This was not a joke. The whole of Northrend was already full of undyings. Zudak, in the northeast corner of Northrend, was the territory of the ice trolls after the explosion of the Well of Eternity. Now it had become a paradise for the undead. In the southeast corner was the settlement of the savage, violent, and vicious Vrykul people. This group of half-giant bloodline warmongers mistakenly regarded the Lich King as the Lord of Justice, who could lead them to conquer Northrend, and even the whole world. The warriors of the various factions who had come on the expedition had become a huge obstacle to their ambitions. The extreme warmongers had completely reduced them to the lackeys of the Scourge army. Under the call of King Immolen, groups of savage Vrykul warriors became undead and turned into the Scourge army as the greatest glory. They used their endless destruction and slaughter to prove their strength in exchange for dying in battle to become the Scourge army. Apart from Duque, no one knew how strong the Lich King Arthas was now. If the elites of the Alliance and the Horde were to be sacrificed, they would be able to create another batch of bone griffins or undead hippogriffs. Then, together with the power of the Scourge army, they would be able to raise the Dragonbone Temple to the ground, turning all the dragon remains in the Dragonbone Waste into undead dragons. Then Azeroth would be finished. William said, "Uncle Duque, do you have any good suggestions? This attack on the Alcaphon treasury is just a simple trap. It doesn't matter if Arthas takes our bait or not. In the big battle, we have to fight steadily." Duque raised his hand, and the chess piece representing the Alliance's army began to move on the 3D map. On the western front, once the Fearless Fortress is built, we will immediately advance all the way north and occupy the entire Northwind Taiga, Sriracha Basin, and Winter Embrace Lake. I hope that the Western Army can use Winter Embrace Lake as a base and cooperate with Naxxramas to confront the Iceground Fortress. We have to create the impression that Naxxramas will hit the Iceground Fortress at any time. Ah! Hoof Iroh let out a small cry. She was shocked by Duque's idea. Naxxramas with Arthas. After all, Naxxramas was a creation of the Titans. No matter how terrible Arthas' cold wind was, it could not blow Naxxramas down with its anti-gravity engine. Losing Naxxramas was akin to the Scourge shooting themselves in the foot. The Alliance to with. After everyone paused for a moment, Duke continued, "The arrangements for the Western Front are almost done. Magni, I'll give you 50,000 human infantry. I'll leave the Western Front to you." The Dwarf King laughed heartily. The Western Front was made up of dwarves and gnomes. The Western Front had always been dominated by the dwarves and gnomes, so it was easy for him to go there. Now we have to deal with the Eastern Front. With a wave of Duque's hand, a fleet model appeared in the east. I need a large-scale landing battle from both the east and west sides of the Howling Fjord. Try to occupy the Vrykul's Utgard castle within a week. Then head north, flatten the Grizzly Hills and Zudak, and finally reached the Crystal Song Forest in the middle. Leave it to me. Varian stood up and volunteered. Duque smiled. Even if you didn't ask, I would have done it. But this time, I'll have to trouble you to bring young Seraphar's orc troops. They'll be a good hand in the siege. Do I have air cover here? Yes. Since most of the flying fleet is useless in the Iceground Glacier, they'll be transferred to the eastern front when we reach the Winter Embrace Lake. Also, Duque glanced at Prince Kael'Vatz. The prince understood and smiled. When His Majesty Rin attacks Utgard Castle, the Dalajan will arrive. Attention! It's the Dalajan, not the Dalajan Wizard Legion. This meant that the Dalajan was really going to use all of its power. Hiss! This time, all the leaders gasped, using the entire country to suppress them. The power was great, but on the other hand, if they failed, it would be equivalent to the destruction of the country. All the wizards and their apprentices would become liches and necromancers. Kael'Vatz was really daring. But after thinking about it, they felt relieved. The true ruler of the Dalajan was Duque, the demigod of the Weave. Without his instructions, how could Kael'Vatz suppress the Dalajan academies and make such a bold move? Among the countries, other than the Dalajan, who had the ability to move their capital, there was also the Driniai's Exodar. Although it could be assumed that the alliance was taking care of the severely injured Driniai, Duke did not even ask Imriel about it, which made Imriel feel like he was the only one who was alienated. Hoof bit her lip and said to herself, Imriel, oh Imriel, you must do something, or else you and your people will continue to be secretly ostracized. In fact, she was thinking too much. Firstly, the Driniai were small in number and weak. Secondly, Duque was afraid that if the Driniai were to enter the battlefield, it would further damage the Driniai's vitality. Duque had informed the other leaders to try not to let the Driniai be the infantry in the charge, but in the end it made Hoof think too much. Duque did not notice this detail and continued to arrange the army. As the fearless fortress was quickly built, Vasht's Naga and Murloc army were naturally transferred to the eastern front. When she saw that even the Naga and Kiraji insect people had missions, Hoof finally could not help but ask, Commander Marcus, may I ask what the Driniai's mission is? Merritt, who was standing beside her, took a step forward so that his body was closer to the front of the 3D projection. His intention to fight was obvious. Duque was speechless, but then he smiled. All right then, I originally considered that the Driniai's vitality was greatly injured. Imriel suddenly stood up and puffed out her chest. Commander, please do not worry. The Driniai's responsibility is to exorcise evil. We have long been used to sacrifice. Imriel's words were sonorous and powerful, and many of the alliance leaders were moved. All right then, promise me a few conditions. Please speak. I can put the Driniai's holy knights together with the Silver Hand, and they will be responsible for the final assault on the Ice-Crown Fortress. But in the assault team, only children without descendants are not allowed to enter, no siblings are allowed to enter, and only one family is allowed to enter. Chapter 1557. Everyone fell silent when they heard this. Who didn't have friends and family in this world? Everyone knew that Duque was doing this for the good of the Driniai. Unknowingly, Imriel's eyes became a little moist. Fair and just yet humane. Perhaps it was because the alliance had such a leader that it was so strong. Imriel felt that she had wronged Duque. Thank you for your understanding, Lord Commander. The Driniai will take note of this, but we hope to participate in more aspects and truly integrate into the big family of the alliance. Hoof's words were very appropriate. It was hard to imagine that she was still a young girl half a year ago. Most of the leaders smiled. They were never stingy with encouraging juniors with potential, just like how Magni nurtured William back then. Moreover, with Duque's backing, they could do whatever they wanted. As for Hoof's request, Duque basically satisfied it. After all, the Holy Knight was the symbol of the alliance, and had an irreplaceable role. Their existence itself was a symbol of the fight against evil. Compared to mages who needed talent, Holy Knights could basically become a Holy Knight as long as they were devout. At this critical juncture against the Scourge army, the more devout Drinii could obviously play a greater role. After the meeting, fierce battles broke out all over Northrend. First was the Obsidian Temple. Under Onyxia's lead, the Red Dragon army swarmed in. Sure enough, they found Soterio with a group of adult black dragons hatching twilight dragons. To put it bluntly, Soterio couldn't even defeat Onyxia. His fate was decided from the moment the Obsidian Temple was attacked. When the angry Alexstrasza bit off Soterio's neck, Onyxia had almost killed the rest of the black dragons. The Red Dragon army entered the battlefield more to wipe out the Draconians and black dragons, as well as to prevent any of them from escaping. What a loss of composure! Not a single one of the chromatic dragons in the Dragon Slumber Temple discovered that Soterio was breeding such a blasphemous creature right under his nose. The Red Dragon Queen crushed the last Twilight Dragon egg with her claw. Onyxia held her neck high, her black vertical pupils filled with pride. My master is indeed the master of fate. Your Majesty Alexstrasza. I know. I will help Duque suppress the Heaven's Wrathgate. The Queen turned her head. Cleostras. Crassus lowered his head. Yes, Your Majesty. I'm here. Pass down my order. Have all the mobility troops of the Sleeping Dragon Temple patrol the Dragonbone Waste. If they find any traces of the Scourge army, report immediately. The Red Dragon Queen gritted her teeth. Don't even think about desecrating the remains of our people. The activity of the Dragon Slumber Shrine also stimulated Earthes in the Ice Crown Fortress. Sitting upright on the ice throne, Earthes' entire body was enveloped by an icy wind that was close to absolute zero. Just getting close to the ice throne gave her the terrifying feeling that her body had been completely frozen. Are those giant lizards impatient to come here to die? Below the throne, an undead woman with huge demonic wings knelt on one knee. From her appearance, one could tell that she used to be a beautiful high elf. She was the Blood Queen Lanais. History changed again. In history, she was the confidant of the elf prince Kael. When Kael sided with Illidan, she followed Illidan to Northrend to crusade against Earthes. However, she who was bent on revenge against the Scourge army, unfortunately died in battle. The dead Lanais and the other Blood Elf elites were resurrected by the Lich King, and became the Sarine family. They assisted the Lich King in commanding the Scourge army to fight everywhere. In this life, because of Duque's incessant troubles, even Kael did not side with Illidan. However, she unfortunately died while resisting Earthes' invasion of Kuel Salis, and was turned into an undead. With the grass growing 3 feet high on Kel-Thuzad's grave, Earthes, who had no one to use, had no choice but to promote her as his assistant. Lanais said in a low voice, Your Majesty, those lizards did not leave the Dragonbone Waste area, but they cleaned up a few of our lich teams. Earthes waved her hand. Ignore them. I just want to know what Duke Marcus is doing. Duke Marcus himself led a team led by a demigod into Wintergrass Blake Fortress. What? Why didn't you report to me earlier? A gust of cold wind blew, and half of the Blood Queen's body was instantly frozen in the extremely hard ice, leaving only her head outside. Lanais replied with difficulty, Your Majesty, that place has never been our sphere of influence. Now our gargoyles and deaths I can't leave the Iceground Glacier area. Humph. Earthes waved her hand, and the ice around Lanais' body instantly shattered. The Blood Queen knew that she had finally escaped the fate of destruction. Earthes' face darkened. He had shot himself in the foot this time. In order to resist Duque's Weave invasion, he had used a large number of frost elementals to surround his lair. The extremely cold ice storm isolated the enemy's spying, but it also caused his perception of the elements to drop to a low point. He was a paladin in life, and a death knight after death. Whether it was in life or after death, he was actually only good at frost elementals, and his perception of other elements was rather poor. This caused him to be unable to sense Duque when he suppressed his elemental fluctuations, even if he swaggered past the foot of the mountain 10 kilometers away. Moreover, Winter Embrace Lake was originally a Titan ruin. There were their own elemental guards there, and the Lich King's undead could not enter the area at all. In the end, Duque had gotten the upper hand just like that. Just as Duque had expected, Duque's move had made him rather uncomfortable. Even the gargoyle that had spied on Duque's group entering Winter Embrace Lake Stronghold had been deliberately let off by Duque. In the image, Duque had entered with Vashj and Onyxia, as well as Cervantes, Jaina, and several other Alliance powerhouses. In the end, he did not forget to smile at the gargoyle. This was clearly saying, "I'm right here. Come out and hit me if you can." Arthes's entire body was trembling. Such provocation. Such arrogance. Did they really think that he, the Lich King, was a fake? Pass down my order. Attack from the gates of heaven's wrath. Your Majesty, could it be a trap? Lanais reminded softly. Trap? Of course it's a trap. But he underestimated my strength. He thought that I was still the same me that he had wantonly cut off my arm, and cut into two at the waist. Arthes clenched his fists. Underestimating my strength is his greatest failure, and the price is the eternal calamity of his soul. Since he destroyed Kel'Thuzad, he will use his own soul to replace Kel'Thuzad. He is a demigod. Lanais said with a trembling voice. There is no existence that can escape my enslavement after dying under my sword. Arthes slowly raised his world-famous Frostmourne. The ferocious skeleton blade emitted the most vicious and vivid evil light. You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.